Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The novel Sun Over the City finally got the recognition it deserved. It was printed in a fairly large circulation, and it did not lie dead weight on the store shelves as it used to be with other Hunter books. The novel was bought up like hotcakes. Even one director, young but promising, signed a contract with Hunter for screen adaptation. For the first time in the past year, the writer who had become famous breathed fully, filled with pride in himself. A corner of his mind, he realized that the success of the novel, by and large, was a kind of gift from his publisher. On his own initiative, decided to invest in a PR campaign to the full program. Such generosity was a consequence of tragic events in the life of Hunter Wilson. Exactly 1 year ago, his wife Margaret died in a car accident. The publisher wanted to cheer up Hunter, who for 6 months has completely shrunk and stopped writing, locking himself away from everyone in his house. And guess what? As soon as the novel was talked about from all irons, Hunter resurrected and became the same. Yes, he understood all this, but these thoughts internally corrupted him. He needed no favors. Hunter was almost convinced that Sun Over the City, and without all this charity, could have won the hearts of his readers. It just so happened to be the case. In fact, the money that the publisher had spent on advertising could have been invested earlier. Surely, it is common for the publishing business money, just earlier that he was greedy, not believing in his talent and afraid of losing losses. Another 6 months passed. Passions about his novel have somewhat subsided. Hastily filmed and released on the big screens, the movie. Basically, let's face it, it failed. The costs of its production were, of course, paid off. Even the profit of pennies turned out, but Hunter himself was able to watch only the first 20 minutes of the tape. Spit and vowed never to get involved with young, even if promising directors. Publisher hustled on the wave of fading success, needed at all costs a new novel, even average now, could be well sold. Hunter began to break, at first by hints, then persuasion, and finally, demands that was quite logical, based on the clauses of the contract signed with the publisher in the next 5 years to give out on the mountain at least a novel a year. The advance payment was given to him, and it was just a matter of taking a pen and paper and sitting down at his desk. Hunter couldn't type on the computer because he didn't have enough speed. His fingers couldn't keep up with the heated thought. At first, he wrote on paper and gave 15-20 pages to his secretary, and the case in such a tandem got along quickly. But this time Hunter's thought barely moved, and he didn't want to see anyone near him, so he decided to write electronically. At times, mysticism became a trend. This summer, sales of a thriller with the presence of the otherworldly showed good sales, and the next book the publisher ordered Hunter in this genre. But this is not quite his niche. He could write good detectives. Even fiction turned out quite tolerable. But to pure mysticism, such he never wrote, but in the end, thought Hunter, it is not important what to write about, and it is important as he will write. In his head formed a plot about poltergeist, which pursued one unfortunate family wherever it did not escape from him. At the same time, all those who tried to help this family, uncleanness also began to harass. So in the end, those who wanted to get involved in the affairs of the family, there was no one left at all, and between its members increased strife, nerves, resources were exhausted so much that it was time to go begging. But somehow one day, no, one beautiful night, and Hunter couldn't think of anything else. The finale should be grandiose, unpredictable, and partly returning the reader from fantasy to reality. But already the first chapter immediately went wrong. 5 variants of the beginning were mercilessly erased and deleted even from the trash. The publisher began to inquire about the progress of the work twice a week. It was the beginning of July, and summer would slip away along with the current trend. Autograph sessions still had to be arranged. Acquaintances and strangers alike continued to take notes on social media and snip phones. Hunter didn't have time to get his own literary agent to handle these kinds of problems. He began to tire of success. Sensing his impending failure, something had to be done, and he decided to hide from the public eye. With the money accumulated in his work, he bought a house in some wilderness, warned everyone not to dare to touch him, at least in the next 2 months, and left, taking with him only bedding, a laptop, and 3 cases of Irish beer. Arriving at the place where he was met by the real estate agent who had handled the deal from start to finish, Hunter couldn't believe his eyes. It was that rare occasion when everything looked much better in real life than it did in the photos. The house was beautiful. A road surrounded by coniferous forest led to it from the town, tightly adjoining the steep shore of a huge lake. The shore had no guardrails, and the agent warned that in especially rainy weather, drive carefully because you could slip and fly 15 meters down, right onto the rocks. Not far from Hunter's new home, there was another structure that no one had warned him about before. "I'm going to have neighbors?" He wondered, staring at the agent in bewilderment. "They are almost never here," he reassured him. "They're going to sell the house too. So I assure you, no one will bother you in the next 6 months. They're having problems with the documents. So far, so and so. Are they here now? I didn't see any while I was shopping for you, so I didn't bother you about it. Anyway, it's the quietest place you can find in the area, considering the convenience and beauty of the scenery. It's only 20 kilometers to the city. In good weather, in an hour you can turn back and forth if you need something. Tourists have taken a liking to the opposite shores. There are no available sites for them here. I bought you groceries for a week, as you asked. Everything on the list. Something in the refrigerator, something in the basement. I'll show you around." "Okay, thank you." And this place, let me point out, continued to persuade Hunter agent, is chosen with a perspective just for you. One day you'll be able to buy the neighboring plot, and then there won't be a single obstacle left. You're a famous writer, aren't you? Have you made inquiries yet? Well, you should know your clients by sight. I read your sunshine over the city in a heartbeat. For professional reasons, no offense, Hunter, just out of interest. And how did you like the novel? Objectively. Objective? What's that supposed to mean? Very subtly captured all the details of city life, how the inhabitant of the stone jungle was pulverized, how infantile and suggestible he became, and all this against the background of a detective story. Just brilliant. Wow, Hunter was genuinely impressed. Yes, you'd make an excellent book reviewer. Have you tried blogging? Oh, come on, I mean, it's from the heart. Real estate feeds me. Reading is just a hobby. Let's go inside, shall we? Come on, let's go. After talking all the details over with the agent, Hunter was finally rid of his endless pleasantries and left alone in the house. When the noise of the engine lurking around the corner of the car became silent, Hunter was stunned by a silence like he had never known. Amazing, and it happens. The weather outside was windless, and the bright sun was shining through the dark and mighty spruce and pine trees, which were already slanting toward the west. There were no birds, no creaking of trunks, no rustling of red maples and young oaks that grew near the house. There was only the slight groaning of the floorboards as Hunter walked through the rooms, putting away the linens in the closets and preparing the desk for future work. Even goosebumps sometimes ran down his back from the strange feeling of his own, almost non-existence, as if the world had suddenly lost sight of him and wasn't going to look for him. The small hall turned out to have a fireplace. The agent assured Hunter that it was working. Even a pile of dry wood lay beside it. For the sake of interest, Hunter opened the damper, threw a couple of logs into the hearth, put some newspapers under them, in which the laptop was wrapped, and struck a match. The fire lit quickly, and the draft was excellent. Great! At night he would sit here, working out plots in his mind and sipping an Irish drink. As he sat in the chair by the fireplace, he realized that he was desperately sleepy. The packing, the journey, and the changes had tired him out quite a bit. Having made the bed with new linen, Hunter, without undressing, lay down on top of the blanket, and in a minute he fell into a deep sleep. He was awakened by the shouts coming from outside the house, which were not so loud, but they were clearly audible against the silence. Hunter thought that some unexpected guests had arrived, but he had not given his new address to anyone, precisely to avoid such visits. He got up, went out on the veranda and looked around. There was no one on the front lawn, only his car. The sun had long since set. The stars were burning brightly in the dark sky. Not illuminated here by the glow of the city lights, grasshoppers were chirping in the grass, which had not been heard during the day, and there were those cries again. Only now did he recognize their source. They were coming from the house opposite, from a room on the first floor, in the window of which the reddish light of a lamp was barely visible. Two people were arguing, a woman and a man. Hunter could not make out the words, but the raised tones indicated that the matter was moving toward a fight. That's the last thing we need. The agent claimed that the neighbors were hardly ever here and that he'd never seen them. What an asshole. Yes, his sentimental plans had been invaded by unexpected nuances that would somehow have to be reckoned with. Hunter went back into the house, took a beer out of the refrigerator, sat down at the desk, and opened his laptop. The Dickens family was a very ordinary American family, no better or worse than any other. He wrote and heard it loud and clear. And don't you dare meddle in my life again. I know it was you who killed. Hunter shuddered. From the last words of the phrase, his heart beat fast. The woman had said this on the street, apparently running out of that house. Then there was the sound of a car door slamming shut, the muffled roar of a running engine, and the rustle of tires scattering gravel. Hunter looked at his watch, 1:30. He sat a little by the fireplace with a beer, thinking about something far from the vicissitudes of the planned novel. At 3:00 the electronic alarm clock beat, startling him and bringing him back to reality again, having forgotten to turn it off. In the city, Hunter was always up at 3 a.m. while everyone who could disturb him was still asleep. He had until 8 a.m. to jot something down on paper, and at 8 a.m. his secretary would come in and take it away. After the death of his wife, he continued to get up on the alarm clock, inwardly resisting the changed circumstances. He took paper, but except for scribbling crossed-out paragraphs, he could not get anything out. Resistance was useless. It only took away the last strength from the creative process. The secretary Stella also came at first, waited silently for an hour, not wanting to somehow announce her presence, and also quietly disappeared, realizing that there would be no work for her again, and after a month she quit. Although Hunter continued to pay her salary regardless of whether or not she had a workload. The alarm clock kept ringing at 3:00, and Hunter, like a ghost who had lost his memory, habitually sat down at his desk and played the role of a writer until 8:00. The first night in the new place did not bring any special results. 4 pages of confused text, full of stylistic and semantic errors. On the second and third night, the screams from the neighbors only intensified. They lasted from 12 to 4 a.m. and ended the same way. The woman would shout one last catchy phrase, slam the car door, and run off somewhere else. Work on the book stalled again. In the morning after the third sleepless night, Hunter decided to visit the restless couple and have a serious talk with them. After all, he had every right to make his claims against them. The law has not yet been abolished, even if we take into account that on the site of the lake, there were only one neighbor. But when the doorbell rang, no one from the house came out. He tried peering in and knocking on the windows, but they were tightly curtained. The two-story building showed no signs of life. It was also surprising that the car the woman used to leave each time never appeared on the only road leading into town. That road was clearly visible from Hunter's window, but there was no other way for Hunter to leave this forest edge with the two structures anywhere nearby. It was unclear how the car had managed to drive off the property without escaping his attention. Returning back in the evening, he hadn't seen her either. Maybe it had happened during the day while he was asleep. Today he sat out on the veranda until just before sunset on purpose, trying to spot any sign of movement on the neighboring property, but all was quiet, just as it had been the first day he'd been here. There was only the flutter of a curtain in a first-floor window, as if someone had glimpsed a glimpse and then disappeared. At night, however, the same pattern was repeated, the shouting, the clatter of falling chairs, the clinking of dishes. It even seemed that another voice, a child's, had joined the duet. Hunter couldn't take it anymore and called the police. "Captain Jones, is this it? Hello." Trying to speak calmly and evenly began Hunter. "I'd like to report a disturbance. My neighbors have been making a lot of noise for the fourth night in a row. Can you give me the address, please? It's a lake. I don't know the address yet. I've recently settled here, but there are only 2 houses in the whole neighborhood. Mine and those rowdy neighbors. So I know where it is, but do you live in a smaller house or a 2-story? The smaller one, I only have a loft. And the screams are coming from the 2-story. Well, accordingly, there was silence on the other end. Hello?" Hunter said loudly, "Are you still there? Can you hear me?" Yes, I can." "And you were talking to the former owner of the house. About what?" Hunter was a little surprised at the question about anything. "Did he tell you anything about the house?" "The agent handled the purchase. I only talked to him. And what does that matter?" "I see." Sighing, Captain Jones said, "Understand what?" Hunter was already starting to get annoyed by the strange logic of the conversation. "Are you sure?" In the same vein, continued the captain, "That is not some tourists." "What tourists? This is a private area. There are no tourists here. A woman is arguing with a man, and today I also heard a child's voice. The light is on in the window of the first floor. Why would a tourist go into someone's house and yell at the whole neighborhood?" That's right. The captain agreed. "Okay, we'll figure it out. So you're coming? How are you going to deal with it? Because the neighbors are not there during the day. Right now, we have all the cars involved. There's a little trouble in town. An interception plan has been announced, but don't worry, as soon as we get a chance, we'll take action. And I would still advise you to talk to the former owner of the house." Hunter disconnected the connection and threw the cell phone on the table without even saying goodbye. Some strange captain, after thinking for a while, dialed the agent's number. "Hunter, what's wrong?" The voice in the receiver sounded sleepy and slightly scared. Hunter looked at the clock. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Dan completely forgot what time it was now. "Daniel, sorry to wake you up in the middle of the night. I just have one question for you." "Yes. Did you ever speak to the previous owner of this house?" Agent Daniel, he thought about it for a while. No, his kids handled the deed. Is there something wrong with the paperwork? No, there's just a hell of a thing going on with these neighbors. You said they wouldn't bother me, but they're fighting every night, and I can't wait to get back to town. Oh, I'm sorry, Hunter. I've never even seen them, and from what I could tell, it looked like it was supposed to be quiet. Believe me, I in no way meant to mislead you. Why are you asking about the previous owner? No reason. The police told me to talk to him. The police? But that's hardly possible, and they should know better. Why not? You see, Hunter, the previous owner is in a somewhat inadequate state at the moment, in an asylum. A year now, that's why the kids did the deal. It doesn't get any easier by the hour. Hunter said in a low voice. Okay, sorry again for waking you up. Good night. It's nothing, Hunter, it's my job, and you call me if you need anything, at any time as it suits you. I'll try to find out more about the neighbors. At 4 a.m. as it should be, the car engine roared and the neighbor's ghostly car, on an incomprehensible route, swept away. This time the woman shouted, "It will come back to you. Mark my words, it will." Hunter typed this on the laptop screen in large letters. He grinned in a sort of unnatural smile and left for the bedroom. The next night, Hunter, having managed to write 5 more pages of text, closed the laptop and looked at the clock 10 minutes past 1. He took the last bottle of beer out of the fridge and sat down by the fireplace, waiting for a new show in the neighbor's house. But the screams didn't start, and at 2 o'clock it was quiet, and at 3:30. It looked strange already. Hunter went to the window. The lamp on the first floor opposite was not burning either. Had they really gone away? Had the long-awaited peace and freedom? But before he could rejoice at such a thought, he noticed that in the windows of the second floor, light flickered, so could shine only a hand lamp, quickly moving the beam from corner to corner. This time it really could be either tourists or thieves. Should we call the police again? Hunter immediately discarded the idea. Useless. He took a heavy poker from the fireplace and decided to find out what was wrong with those damned neighbors. Normally such boldness was not Hunter's usual characteristic, but this time something made him risk it, something he couldn't explain to himself. The door to the neighbor's house was slightly ajar, and Hunter stepped cautiously inside, lighting the way with his cell phone flashlight. The first-floor living room was almost empty, just a table, a huge antique mirror, a leather couch, and 3 chairs. It was all covered with a transparent tall cloth. It didn't look like anyone lived here permanently at all. But maybe the owners had disappeared today because they'd finished moving in, taking all their belongings with them. There was clearly someone walking around on the second floor, the lights still flickering randomly from side to side. Hunter walked up the narrow curving staircase to the left and turned off the flashlight on his phone. The source of the light that had attracted him was in one of the bedrooms. Hunter's heart beat faster and louder. He felt the blood rush to his face, his right hand gripping the handle of the poker to the point of pain. He entered the hallowed room and saw a man from the back, bent over and looking at something on the bed. "Hey!" Hunter's voice sounded so loud that he was startled by it himself. The man straightened up sharply and turned around, blinding Hunter with the beam of the flashlight. "What the hell?" he shouted. "Who are you? Who are you?" Covering his eyes with his palm, Hunter asked, "What do you want in someone else's house?" "Police Officer Clark." He introduced himself. "Are you the owner? Drop what's in your hand." When Hunter was able to look at the man, he saw a young man in a police uniform, but there was something not quite right about his official closet, something Hunter couldn't quite understand, but he noted it to himself. "I'm a neighbor," he said. I saw the light and came to see who was snooping around in the middle of the night. It's the third day I've been waiting for you. What's taking so long? What do you mean, waiting? The guy asked me again. I called the station. They said they'd take care of it. You're from the city, aren't you? From the city. But now, Hunter said, the owners have moved out, so it's too late for you. I used to come here a lot, and I've had complaints before. Oh, yeah. Yes, but it's been quiet for a while now. Yeah, I wouldn't say that. Hunter objected. It hasn't been quiet for me lately. Let's go outside, shall we? Let's go outside. They went out on the veranda, and it was already in full bloom outside. The police car in which the officer had come was parked at the far corner of the house. On the way here, Hunter hadn't even noticed it. The officer pushed his cap back and lit a cigarette, letting the smoke drift upward, squinting. Did you see that? He asked, pointing with his hand. The wire broke, so there's no light in the house. Did you have a strong wind the other day? Hunter looked in the direction he was pointing, the cable sagging in the leaves, a black ribbon against the maple trees. There was no wind. Hunter was surprised. Yesterday, the lights were still on the first floor. You'd better call an electrician, or you're going to get a short circuit, and if there's a fire, it could get you. And Officer Clark gave Hunter a hard look. All right, I will. Thank you for coming. As they say, always on the lookout. The officer joked, carefully put out his cigarette butt with his shoe, and got into the car. Have a good day. What's your name? Hunter. Have a good day, Hunter. The older model Ford turned around and pulled onto the road. Hunter followed it with his eyes and only at the last moment noticed that on the side of the car in white letters on a blue stripe, it was written not police, but just service. Didn't have time to change it or what? He thought. He grinned to himself and went into the house. That night Hunter dreamed that he was running along a deserted night highway, feeling that his wife was in some kind of trouble, and the faster he ran, the more and more anxiety squeezed his racing heart. He no longer merely felt, but almost knew that it was so, that his wife was in danger. The road became progressively hotter until his bare feet began to sink into the loose asphalt, slowing his movements. Finally, he saw the raging flames of the fire ahead and heard Margaret screaming. She was crying for help and saying, "It will come back to you. Mark my words, it will." Hunter was almost already stuck in one place, unable to move, and there were only 10 meters to the burning car, inside which his wife was thrashing around. He stretched helplessly his hands and tried to say something in response, but his tongue did not obey him, and in front of the car, the secretary Stella and his wife's friend Melissa, with whom Hunter had had a short affair before the wedding, were running around. They were pouring gasoline from a canister, which made the flames grow even stronger, and then there was a deafening explosion, and the hot pieces of the car flew in different directions and, falling from a height, hit the ground unnaturally loudly. Hunter woke up. Someone was banging forcefully on the door. He jumped out of bed, tangled in the blanket that had fallen to the floor, and banged his head on the nightstand, cursing. He got up and, trying to move carefully, went to open the door. When he opened it, determined to scold the knocker for his overzealousness, he found no one at the door. But the knocking had been going on a second ago, hadn't it? The intruder could not have been so quickly out of sight. Hunter went out on the veranda and looked around. No, there was no one anywhere. Was the furious knocking a continuation of the dream? Quite possibly, considering that he had been mentally strained lately, especially on this night. What's a mental workout? To be honest, Hunter was close to a nervous breakdown, though he didn't want to admit it to himself. Hunter walked into the house, went into the kitchen, and opened the refrigerator. Dan, I'm out of beer. We'd have to go into town anyway, for groceries, an electrician, and the police station. Yeah, the police station was the place to go to say a few nice things to them and find out what was wrong with the previous owner of his house. The first thing he did was to stop by the station. The officer on duty wrote down his passport information, issued him a pass, and pointed out the office of Captain Jones, with whom Hunter had talked on the phone the first night. The captain, fortunately, was in attendance. Hunter knocked on the door and entered. "May I?" he asked politely. "Come in," replied the captain. He was a man in his 50s, with a bushy mustache, sparse hair on his head, and eyes that looked surprised all the time. "I'm Hunter. We spoke to you a few days ago on the phone about the noise from the neighbors at the lake house." The captain rolled his bulging eyes as if trying to recall the fact Hunter had mentioned, then closed them and rubbed his eyelids with his fingers. "Sorry," he said. "Intermittent proctosis. I wouldn't wish it on an enemy. It's from varicose veins in the eye socket. That's what the doctor says, but I'll tell you what it's from. All that paperwork you have to go through all day, that's the real cause. So what about your house? That's what I wanted to ask you." A little puzzled, Hunter said. "Right." The captain looked at him again in surprise. "Hunter, the lake house, yes, it was. So did you talk to the former owner?" "No, since that's not possible. He happens to be in a mental institution since some time." Wow! This time the captain was really surprised. It was to be expected, though. "Why?" "Well, how can I tell you? At one time he also complained about the noise in the neighbor's house. I actually went there myself 4 times, when I was a junior officer. But the thing is, no one's lived in that house for 6 years. How's that?" Now it was Hunter's turn to round his eyes. Like this. The captain splashed his hands. "We all know the story here. It's strange that your agent didn't say anything about it. Although, of course, it has nothing to do with your house. To accuse agents in silence such sensitive information, there is no formal reason. What's the story? Can you explain it to me?" 6 years ago, the captain began. One Christmas night, there was a tragedy, the reasons for which remain a mystery. The husband shot his wife and young son and hanged himself in his office on the first floor without even leaving a note, as is often the case in such cases. What was the reason for this was never found out. An officer was in charge of the case, but he had no time to investigate it to the end. He himself was killed in the line of duty, apprehending a prisoner who had escaped from the colony. "Wait," Hunter interrupted Captain Hunter. "You said Officer Clark?" "Yes. Does that name mean anything to you? But how is that possible?" "What?" "I saw this officer tonight with a flashlight checking out a neighbor's house." The captain leaned back in his chair and began to move his eyes around again. "I'm afraid," he said after a pause, "that you've been misled by someone. Officer Clark couldn't have been in that house that night. But I talked to him the same way I'm talking to you now, so why would I make anything up? Let's go over the facts again." The captain continued calmly. "No one has lived in that house you're talking about for 6 years. That's one. And Officer Clark hasn't been able to talk to anyone in the last 4 years because the dead can't talk to the living. That's 2. As far as I can see, these facts are irrefutable, and it makes no common sense to dispute them." So Hunter continued, "I'm either crazy or someone is trying to play games with me?" "You said it yourself." With an upward pointing finger, the captain summarized, "I'd be more inclined to the second option. But I'm sorry, the story with the former owner of your house can confuse anyone, and considering that you, as far as I know, are a writer, You must have an excellent imagination, and the sleep of the mind, as you know, breeds monsters. Again, I'm sorry if my logic seems offensive to you, but I'm an investigator. I have to think in a completely different way than you do. Hunter was in a stupor, his thoughts rushing around in his head, pushing each other apart. Who could have played such a cruel joke on him? And most importantly, for what purpose? He had never had such desperate enemies before. He ruled out his own insanity at once. What does it have to do with being a writer? Can't writers think logically? They can think logically, maybe even better than investigators. The task of a writer, especially if he writes fiction, is to mislead the reader, to give him at the very beginning of false guidelines, so that until the very last page, he could not guess what, in fact, the whole trick of the events described. The writer is above logic, because logic is only a linear tool, and you have to solve systemic problems and dive into parallel connections, and therefore know what each cog in the mechanism of a tangled plot serves. No, he's not crazy. The tragedy that had happened to his wife, of course, had shaken his nerves, but he had come to the lake full of optimism, and the noise in the house was not a figment of his imagination, nor was today's conversation with the late Officer Clark. So Hunter spoke again. "After I called you, you never sent anyone out to the lake?" "No one." The captain shook his head reassuringly. "We're still in a state of emergency, and there's no cars available and no men. What am I supposed to do now?" Hunter waved his hands. "What do you mean?" "If, God forbid, something strange happens again, where should I go besides a psychiatrist? If anything seriously jeopardizes your life, then, of course, call the station. Otherwise, I'm afraid we can't help you. Not because I doubt your judgment, but because resources are limited, and when we get things sorted out, I'll send a man to look at the house if you like, but that won't be for a while." Hunter remembered. "I need to find an electrician somewhere in town. There's a broken wire in that house, hanging from a tree. It could short out." "A wire?" "Don't worry, it won't short out. The house has been blacked out for years." But Hunter wanted to talk about the light on the first floor, but immediately stopped, not wanting to continue the slippery subject. "Do you have any weapons?" Suddenly the captain asked. What kind of weapon?" "For self-defense," Jones clarified. "It could be tourists or treasure hunters snooping around abandoned houses, scare them, if anything." "No, I don't have any weapons." "Then I suggest you get one." Again, closing his eyes, said the captain, "In your situation, think useful. I don't have any documents to buy a weapon." "You at least buy a bat. Some tin can not so frighten the hooligans as a good baseball bat. We got a store near the station, a gun store. You'll find something suitable. Don't tell them I told you that. Just keep it between us." "All right," Hunter replied and headed for the office. "I'll think about it. Goodbye. Have a good day," said the captain, and again, as if nothing had happened, stared at his papers. Pensively wandering down the corridor of the station, Hunter noticed something unusual on the wall. Perhaps if he hadn't been so absorbed in his thoughts, he would have passed it by, but something in his subconscious seemed to nudge him and make him look at the wall. It was a board with pictures of people in police uniforms. At the top, in large gold letters, it said, "Our Heroes," and among the pictures, Hunter saw a familiar face. It was Officer Clark. Under the photo in small print, it said that he had died heroically on an operation to apprehend a dangerous criminal, having arrested him, but he himself had been mortally wounded. And yes, that was 4 years ago. It was a hot evening, and it was impossible to stay in the house. Hunter took chairs and 3 bottles of fresh beer to the veranda, sat down and carefully examined the neighbor's house, trying not to miss any movement that could happen there. But everything was quiet. The silence, as on the first day, was deafening. Only somewhere in the distance behind the wall of the forest, the voices of birds were heard too, apparently tired from the mercilessly scorching, all-day sun. Hunter leaned against the chair, a bat, purchased in the store, and touched with his fingers its handle, wrapped in rough rubberized tape. The weapons on the counter were available for all tastes: combat, gas, blank charges, electroshock, even bows and crossbows, but all of them required, at least, a medical certificate, and for combat weapons also a hunting ticket. He had to choose a bat, as the captain advised, which was a rather formidable weapon, and unlike the same shocker, noticeable from afar. Hunter tried to imagine the consequences of a blow with this club, looking at not long, rounded at the end spikes. Even for such a purchase had to show a passport. The seller carefully wrote down all the data on the receipt and looked at Hunter glumly, as if suspecting him of some evil intention. However, he said nothing in farewell, only nodded his graying head. How stupid it all is. Instead of writing a book, he had to think about who knows what. But it was an interesting situation. No one was able to help him either. Just like that family tormented by the poltergeist he'd conceived the novel about. At least the feeling of desperate helplessness and abandonment he will be able to describe truthfully, based on his fresh and more than real experience. If only Stella, the secretary, would come in the morning again, it would be more cheerful and less disturbing. But where was she now, this Stella? Probably he had forgotten about the unhappy writer, though they had in common not only pages written in small handwriting, but also something hotter. However, I did not want to remember about it, because at the death of his wife, this hot very quickly cooled down then. To hell with it. Just as Hunter thought of Stella, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello, hello, Hunter." A cheerful female voice sounded in the receiver. "Don't you recognize it?" There was something familiar in Hunter's intonation, but the thought of Stella confused him. "It's Melissa." Without waiting for an answer, the woman clarified the situation. "I changed my SIM card, so I'm calling all my old friends to tell them the new number. How are you? I haven't seen you in a while. Have you started writing?" It was Melissa, the late wife's girlfriend, the one with whom Hunter had a fleeting affair just before his wedding. I don't know why, but he was glad to see her, though he tried not to show it. "Yeah, I'm Melissa. In fact, you are like from the past life, while I was depressed. Time stretched slowly, but as if I came to my senses, and as if I woke up in a boat, but I have no weight, and I do not know how and where to go." "Well, I see," Melissa noticed. "Your imagination is all right, so you will live. And you too." Hunter objected. "Back where?" "It's about fantasy," Hunter clarified. "I had an unpleasant conversation with the captain today. He reproached me, as if by the way, for being too imaginative." "What captain?" "Are they still bugging you about the accident?" "No, it's something else." "What happened? Where the hell are you right now? I can hear the desperation in your voice now." "I've been out of town for 2 weeks. I bought a house by the lake, moved in for the summer to write a book." "Oh, come on. And I came by your place just a week ago, kissed your doorstep, and went home. And no one at the publisher's office is wondering where you've disappeared to. How's the book coming along?" Hunter was pleased to hear that not everyone has forgotten about him after all. Fans and acolytes were not counted. These on the wave of success, he will always be needed. One could hear that Melissa was now genuinely interested in him. To be honest, sighed into the tube, Hunter, the answer is negative. Nothing is written, And not because the ideas have dried up. There are ideas, but because my neighbors turned out to be crazy. Yes, and also existing, as the captain hinted, only in my imagination. You've had it rough, Hunter. What bad luck is and how to deal with it. Listen, of course, I will not impose my society on you, but just by the way, in the city, it is so stuffy here, I was going just somewhere away from the asphalt to hide. I haven't figured out any special escape routes for myself. Maybe. Isn't that the big lake near the town of Vecta? Yeah, that's it. Hunter confirmed it. We used to compete there once. It's a deep lake, perfect for our sport. So what did you want to say about the trails? Hunter, if you need company, but for 2-3 days, I could make my route right through your dacha. I'm not insisting. It's just your voice, so I suggested it. Inwardly, Hunter was even excited by this suggestion. A close person, and even more so a woman, would be more convenient for him now than ever, but he had to pause before answering, so as not to give Melissa his hasty joy. Come, to hell with the book. I'll have time for it. No, Hunter. Melissa spoke up. I will not distract you from the book. You write as much as you want. I'll go snorkeling and sunbathing, and I'll take care of the household, if you let me, and we'll talk at sunset, and remember our best years. I'll be like a mouse. P. Hunter laughed. Come on, mouse, come on over. From our town to Vecta, about 70 kilometers, and from Vecta to the Lake 20, you'll get there in an hour and a half. I'm waiting. Well then, see you in the ambulance. I'll be on my way. I'm just getting gas. See you later. The thought of Melissa's imminent arrival gave Hunter some confidence and a desire to show some activity. He got up and, taking his bat with him, went to take another look at the neighbor's house before going inside. He checked the perimeter once more, assuming the presence of ghosts. Although it was frightening and popped into his head, he still didn't agree. There had to be a rational explanation for everything. Strange stubbornness for a man writing about poltergeists. But maybe the most stubborn of the nationalists, the most fearful of everything otherworldly and without logical support. So perhaps they protect their sanity from a breakdown. And this time we managed to find something. The low shrubbery, shaggy and killed by wild ivy, at the far corner of the house had one oddity. If in other places maples began immediately behind it, in one between it and the trees, there was a space of 4 meters. Hunter crouched down and poked his bat into a tangle of branches, the bat hitting something hard. He pulled the branches apart with his hands, and there it was. Behind the bush was a piece of wooden fence, painted green, and 2 hooks, dressed in hinges on 2 posts, between which there was a distance of 3 meters. Getting it off the hinges was not particularly difficult for Hunter. It was not so heavy due to the fact that the bushes seemed artificial. At first glance, however, it was impossible to distinguish them from the real ones, and Hunter saw a barely traveled road descending the hill on which the house stood and disappearing among the spruce trees. But what did the neighbors need this secret path for? Strange, though it was much easier to accept than a car disappearing into the night without a trace. Determined to find out everything to the end, Hunter followed the road, wanting to find out where it led. The road looped briefly through the woods, and after about 10 minutes of walking, it turned sharply to the right at the lake. So, the main route along the high shore on the left, it never came out, going around the lake in the opposite direction. Everything became clear with this. Now maybe we could find something interesting inside the house as well. In the daylight, the interior did not look so neglected. The furniture tucked away under tulle or plastic sheeting, alternating with objects that were not protected from the dust settling on them. Hunter ran a finger along the antique dresser. Yes, the place hadn't been cleaned in months. In the cramped hallway leading to the dining room, however, an ancient pendulum clock was running smoothly, only 7 minutes behind the correct time. It had been started recently, for the weight on the chain had barely traveled half of its proper distance. In the dining room, Hunter found on the floor a tin bowl of food for an animal, maybe a small dog or a big cat. Drinking water had not had time to evaporate from another bowl, signs of someone's recent presence alternating oddly with desolation. After checking the second floor, Hunter went down to the first floor again and reached the study where the lamp burned at night. He tried to open the door, but it was locked, the only room he couldn't get into, and it was interesting. He kicked the lock as hard as he could, and the door opened. Not a courteous gesture on his part, but he couldn't do otherwise. He was too sore from the trouble he'd been having lately. There weren't many things in the office. A desk, armchairs, and cabinets with books and files along 3 walls. The window was tightly shuttered, and on the desk was the same lamp with the red, Chinese-style shade that had been burning earlier, despite the lack of electricity in the house. Hunter tried to turn it on. No, granted, it didn't work. He strolled along the racks of books, looking at the titles on the spines. Walter Scott, Dostoevsky, Stephen King, books on astrology, a complete mix of genres and tastes of whoever had assembled this collection. And suddenly Hunter Wilson, Sun Over the City. Why is this here? Next to his latest novel were other, earlier novels and short stories, a complete collection such as even he himself did not have. 8 volumes, what a turn! Were the screaming owners of this house among his most loyal fans? Hunter picked up the Sun Over the City and opened the front. Across it, in large curlicue letters, it said, "Dear Kathy, in kind remembrance from the author." It was his handwriting, his autograph. Apparently, a fan named Kathy not only liked to read it, but also did not miss meetings with readers, of which Hunter had dozens in the last year. Of his acquaintances, he didn't have anyone named Kathy, a name he would surely remember. Suddenly the phone rang, and the book fell out of Hunter's hands. He looked at the screen. It was the agent calling. "Yes, Daniel, hello." "Hunter, good evening." "Good evening. I'm calling about your neighbors. Can you talk now?" "Yes, go ahead. I've managed to find out a few things, if you're still interested." "Sure, I got some details about them too." "Yes, what kind of details?" "Turns out they were fans of mine. At least one of them was. The library I found in the house has my complete works. Can you believe it?" "You broke into the house?" Daniel asked excitedly. "It's not locked, and no one has lived in the house for a long time." "That's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about." The agent began. "The owner of the house, one John Parker, as it turned out, he died 6 years ago. I assure you, I knew nothing about that, or the tragedy that took place in the house." "Yeah, I'm aware of that." Agent Hunter was reassured, "and I have no beef with you." But more than that, Daniel interrupted him and immediately paused for a moment. "How to put it? You, Hunter, had something to do with that tragedy." "Me?" "Not personally, of course, but indirectly through my books. It's not your fault, of course, but nevertheless. Kathy, John's wife, was an ardent admirer of yours, never missed a meeting, and no publication escaped her notice. She would sometimes ask her husband to fill in for her at an autograph session if she couldn't attend for some reason. She probably fell asleep with your book in her hands. In general, her husband began to suspect that she is looking for with you not only reading contact, but counting on something more." "In what sense?" "In the sense that her husband suspected her of cheating on him." What the hell is that? I think, Daniel pointed out, it happens to women, and their idols often go out of their way to meet such fans. I'm sorry, I don't mean you at all, but you do realize that women take literature too personally, transferring the characteristics of their characters onto the author. I don't know what the poor woman's feelings were, but her irrepressible passion for reading led to what happened on Christmas night. A nightmare. I don't want to go into all the details again. I guess if you know something, you know it too. But it takes your imagination to imagine the chain of events that went down like that, Hunter. How did you even find out about this? Talk to the former owner of your house. In the psych ward. That's right. I took the trouble to go and see him. He's not that crazy. I'll tell you that much. He was aware of the whole thing. At one time, he had a very close relationship with the neighbors, but when things got heated between the couple, he didn't want to be friends anymore. I don't know. It seemed to me that he had a thing for Kathy. He spoke of her with a special piety. It was like he had a premonition of this kind of ending. He said that John had been completely insane since the fall and all through the early winter before Christmas. He'd gone off the rails, as they call it. They had a big fight. Kevin from the asylum, the one who lived in your house, even managed to buy the only road into town and forbade John to use it. He had to take a detour to Vecta, across the lake. That's all I've been able to dig up. Very valuable information, said Hunter. Thank you very much, Daniel, for doing this work. Don't mention it, Hunter. I've missed some important details myself, so I'll learn a lesson. And as for the noise you mentioned, the culprits are to be found elsewhere. You understand that the former owners have nothing to do with it, unless by will their house passed to some of the heirs, but in this direction my searches did not yield any results. Here it is necessary to involve some lawyers. Got it. Hunter summarized. Thank you again. If there is anything new, be sure to call me. I will. Hunter put the phone away, picked up the fallen book from the floor, and opened the autographed page again. The story with the neighbors might now be quite complete, if it weren't for one thing, but huge letters throbbed in his head. How could he sign Kathy's book this year? If she and her husband had died 6 years ago, who had been faithfully adding to the collection in the abandoned house all those 6 years anyway? And the screams he heard at night were not hallucinations, a man and a woman arguing, and a baby crying. Clarity, by and large, in the whole affair was not added. Dragging the bat along the ground, Hunter walked back to his house, and it was only as he crossed the road that he noticed the light green Nissan nestled behind his Mazda. On the veranda sat Melissa and smiled. Well, hello there, Ryder, she said cheerfully. Were you hunting a mammoth? How pleasant her voice sounded, in the midst of this ominous evening silence. Hello, friend, he answered, went up to the veranda to the guest and kissed her on the lips. You don't know what mammoths are here sometimes. Your weapons are formidable. Pointing to the bat, Melissa said. That's all I'm supposed to have. Melissa rummaged in her purse and took out a small, shiny gun. I have something too, she said. Jesus, Hunter exclaimed. We got a whole gang here now. What do you need a gun for? Did you think I turned into a maniac and hold hostages in the basement? Melissa laughed. No, it's just that your voice on the phone seemed to me a little frightened. And now I see that I did not just think that. It's not a combat one. It's a starter. I brought it with me from one of the competitions. I don't dive now. My breathing is not the same. But sometimes they call me to judge, so it's my weapon of choice. It makes a hell of a lot of noise, scares even a bear away. Too bad you're not competing anymore, said Hunter. I remember when you could hold your breath for 5 minutes. Has your record been broken yet? Not in the state yet, but in the world I've never even come close. It's fantastic minutes out there. Free divers have been going over 10 minutes for a long time. For me, it's just out of the realm of fantasy. Surprised Hunter. Have they learned to stop the heart like you? That's your trick. I remember it particularly well. Come on. Melissa waved her hand. Where can I get to these tricks now? I'm an old woman. I can't compete with young people now. But I remember you exactly as you are, and you haven't changed a bit, as you were a beauty, and you still are. I must have gotten old. I've gone gray, said Melissa, stroking Hunter's hair. So unusual, but gray hair suits you. Somehow you've grown up even. Why isn't your car in the garage? I went in the garage, but I couldn't get the door open. Is it true that there's a maniac at night? It's filled to the ceiling with old stuff. I couldn't get my hands on the car. Let's go inside. You must be hungry. We'll fix you a light supper. Come on. With Melissa in the house, time passed quickly for Hunter. Even the ghosts seemed frightened by her presence. Not once over the next 7 days, no more disturbing screams, creaks, or the red lamp in the window across the street. Hunter again began waking at 3 a.m., and until 8 a.m., he modeled the paper with an unstoppable stream of plot twists for the novel. He transferred his benevolence even to the most fierce of his heroes, Poltergeist. It turned out that the noisy spirit simply had unrequited feelings for the daughter of a long-suffering family who did not want to play with him and in every way avoided his attention. The spirit even thought of interrupting his ghostly existence from the excess, not divided feelings, and gave the girl a way to get rid of him once and for all. And the girl was about to do it when she suddenly realized that it was wrong, that Poltergeist is just a wild, unbridled creature, longing to be loved and needed, that he also deserves to get the opportunity to go to the side of the world. And well, Hunter himself was surprised at this direction of his thoughts. According to the original plan, the novel was to be a denunciation of human cowardice and duplicity, when the created public good is possible only within the framework of relative well-being, the benefactors themselves, but only a real danger to overstep the personal boundaries of good-hearted citizens, as they immediately grow thorns, detaching themselves from the situation and caring only about themselves. Melissa liked the new plot much better. Between swimming at the lake and cooking lunches, she took over as Stella's secretary, reprinting text from paper onto the monitor screen. She was slow at it, but Hunter was glad she was. The novel was nearing completion, and in any case he had time to send it to the publisher before September, who, to his credit, had stopped bothering him with endless hints of pressing deadlines. But if the paper feelings had come closer to their finale, the real feelings that had settled in this house with Melissa's arrival were only gaining momentum. Their fleeting connection from the past had taken on new colors. They were now both moderately wise, moderately passionate, and moderately able to account for their actions, and there was nothing to prevent their intimacy from being platonic to bodily a few days later. Enough time had passed since the death of Margaret's wife, and Melissa, as far as Hunter could understand, had not had a steady partner in the city since their separation. It seemed to Hunter that things were finally getting better in his life. The appearance of Melissa in the house, he took it as a reward for the recent agony. It was still unclear how, for example, the meeting with the non-existent Officer Clark had come to seem like a dream. Why? His nerves were so tense that he could dream anything and mistake it for reality. He wasn't just thinking about it, he was convincing himself of it, as if he were living in the image of a madman walking along the border separating illusion from reality. People tend to convince themselves that something didn't really happen in their past, or if they did, it was different in some way, with nuances that could justify them. They are not villains or crazy. They have all read children's fairy tales. They know where good and bad are. They are just weak at times, as if weakness justifies any mistake. The doubts, driven to the bottom of his soul, scraped unpleasantly from the creek, giving Hunter a noise in his head, and only when he took paper in his hands and began to write, the noise subsided, giving way to other people's emotions, becoming for 5 hours as if they were his own. On one such morning at 8:30, when Hunter had set his novel down, he went out on the veranda, smiling absent-mindedly and to the end, not believing in the successful completion of his work. The heat, even on the morrow, was unwilling to abate. The windows open in the house did not save from the stuffiness, and the cold beer the body could no longer fit. Hunter went to his favorite chair and saw some postcard, so it seemed to him. Maybe in his heart he was waiting for congratulations from all parts of the country. He took it in his hands, looked at it, and his heart sank into his heels. No, not this again. What the hell? Why now? It can't be like this. It was a photograph of his late wife's car engulfed in flames. A photograph from the scene of the very accident that had divided his life into before and after, and which he had been trying not to think about all this time, trying to scratch out of his memory like he scratched out bad bits of text from a novel. On the back of it, as if written by a 5-year-old child, "Mark my words, he'll be back." Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, his hands trembled, and it felt like it was -40, not +20 outside. Hunter, as if in a dream, went back into the house, took a pair of scissors out of the drawer, and began to angrily cut up the photograph, putting the scraps in a neat pile on the table. Melissa came out of her bedroom and stared at him fearfully for over a minute. "Hunter," a little audibly she said. "Hunter, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? Are you all right?" He looked at her uncomprehendingly, grinned half his face in a smile, and said, "They know everything." "Who do they?" "Know what?" "They know everything," Hunter repeated. "They won't leave me alone." "What do I do, Margaret?" "Hunter, come to your senses. I am Melissa." "What are you talking about? Melissa?" For a second, Hunter's eyes became clear. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, yes, Melissa, I need to." "I'll be right there. Don't go. I'll be right there." And Hunter rushed out of the house, got into his car, pushed the gas pedal to the floor, and sped down the road to town. It seemed to him that the car was going too slowly, as if a whole carload of passengers had been hitched to it from behind, and he had to get there in time. In time for what? Where to? As if someone was calling him, but the name and the place of meeting did not tell him. A wooden sign hung on a chain flashed to the right. A road to the city. Strange. Apparently some joker had ordered it to be installed here. He hadn't noticed it before. He looked in the side mirror and saw the sign again. His thoughts were all jumbled up in his head, all sorts of nonsense that he couldn't handle. No matter how he turned that sign either way, it read like a road to the city, a palindrome. And therefore, there was no road that could lead him to a life-saving goal. The target was approaching and distant at the same time. He hit the brakes as hard as he could. The car skidded to the left, the gravel slamming into the bottom of the car. Stop! When the dust cloud cleared, Hunter saw the lake glistening in the sunlight ahead of him. The front wheels froze in centimeters from the cliff. His whole body shuddered with chills. He was seized with horror. Carefully, matching every movement, Hunter shifted into reverse and pulled back onto the road. Then he turned left, into the woods, where there was a slightly visible rut. He drove another 100 meters and stopped. As he struggled to unbuckle his seatbelt, He jumped out of the car, ran to a tree as if the car was about to explode. He crouched down, hiding behind the trunk, took a breath, and immediately fell into his memories, into the pieces of it that had once been carefully kicked out of his head. In the month before Margaret's tragedy, their relationship had deteriorated to the point where it was hard to imagine how these people had once genuinely loved each other. They had not spoken to each other for many days, and his wife had filed for divorce, unable to bear Stella in their house, nor her husband's completely depraved character. His sunshine over the city could not end. He was furious. Everything irritated him. Hysterics followed hysterics. Horse Stella, who had fallen in love with Hunter, was caught between two fires. On the one hand, Margaret's sizzling jealousy, and on the other, the unbridled passion of Hunter, who did not realize reality. It was as if the house had been booby-trapped and was about to blow up. The house that belonged to Margaret, in case of divorce, Hunter would lose everything. He would become a bum for no one. Not yet favored, neither by his publisher nor by the reading public. At that time, he was not yet the Hunter Wilson known at the top of the literary world. He was a nobody. Only the sun over the city could move things forward. Hunter felt it. He knew it, as any relatively talented creator knows everything about his creation before it is finally released. He needed only a month of concentrated work, only a month, but it was as if the monster was devouring the time, leaving him not a minute. Hunter had no car of his own, and he had never learned to drive. Sometimes he used his wife's car when there was an urgent need to go somewhere. That day he was going to the city too, and he didn't even remember now for what purpose. The brakes went bad. He decided not to put it off in a long box and went to a car service. That's where it happened, a stray thought, a fleeting anger that created a monster in his heart. The mechanic looked at the brake system, whistled, and said that fateful phrase. Another day and you'd be in the morgue for sure. Is it that serious? How much more serious could it be? Answered the mechanic and tapped the wheel with the key. I'm afraid I can't do it in one day. You come back tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll tell you the exact time and price. Where was he in such a hurry? Completely slipped my mind. Doesn't matter what he's attached to it. What does it matter? He had to admit to himself that the reason for his decision was not the need to go somewhere, but the simple thought that there was no need to fix the brakes now. No need. Hunter was already standing at the bus stop when it hit him. He went back to the service and took the car back, saying he would be back tomorrow, but he never came back. He got home, never got to where he was going, quietly put the car in the garage, and with a sinking heart, sat down to finish the remaining pages. Stella was finishing typing the last of the sheets she had. The work was going well. He was calm. Peace spread over his whole body in a hot spill. He smiled and wrote well, splendidly, and at the same time enjoyed the half-realized premonition, the imminent finale of a difficult head and in his own life. He knew how everything would happen, as if he were watching a movie that had already been released and in which it was now impossible to change a single scene. As if playing his part, he made another scandal in the evening. Stella ran out of the house in tears. Margaret shouted some insults, the most harmless of which was to denounce him as mediocre. He's talentless? Let's see what she says to that, if she can speak at all. Hunter answered Margaret as if with a memorized text and calmly watched her hatred turn into an uncontrollable outburst devoid of any objective meaning. It was past midnight. She too ran out in tears, got into her car, and drove away into the hazy haze of distant city lights. He knew she would never come back. There was no sign for the road to the city. It was a one-way trip only. That was it. Now he could breathe fully. He admitted it to himself. He was ready to move on. Yes, he'd thought about those damn brakes. He'd wanted to, but they were just thoughts. Little pulses in his brain running back and forth along the neurons, and nothing more. A wish. How many desires don't a person have? He didn't mess with the brakes. He never even laid a finger on Margaret. He just saw more than the others. But that's why he's a brilliant writer. To be able to see such things, it's his gift from birth. After all, it's her car, and it's up to her to see to its condition. To hell with regret. To hell with doubt. To hell with all those feeble-minded people who made a spectacle of the dead policeman, with the books signed supposedly for Kathy, with the shouting of non-existent neighbors, with the picture of this one at last. He'll sue them too, if he has to, and he'll stomp them into the dirt. Let them try it again, you fools. Hunter came back, didn't explain anything to the confused. In a second, Hunter, who was soaking wet, ran into the house, and at the next flash saw Melissa's body sprawled on the floor in the hall. Looking around and finding no one around, Hunter ran up to her and shook her by the shoulder. "Melissa?" he shouted. "What happened? Are you all right?" There was another flash, and Hunter saw that the woman's head was smashed and lying in a pool of thick blood. "Melissa!" he screamed, but the woman didn't move or respond, and he tried to feel for a pulse on her neck, then on her wrist. Where was it, that pulse? Dan, there was no way he could detect it, but the body was still warm. The light flashed again, and Hunter's hair on his head stirred. Next to Melissa lay his bat, also bloody, and in his right hand, the woman clutched her shiny pistol that she had been bragging about. What was going on here? Why had she gone into this house alone? Why didn't she wake him up? Lightning had already incessantly illuminated the neighborhood. Hunter could now clearly see the whole picture, and just as clearly he realized that Melissa was dead, and next to her was his bat, which her head had been smashed against. We should call the police or an ambulance. Now where do we call? Hunter rushed back to his house, found his cell phone, began to dial the number with trembling fingers, and suddenly froze. What was he doing? What the hell are the police doing? All the evidence points to him. It's his bat, his fingerprints. And this is the house that's been driving him crazy for a long time. Who's gonna believe him after he told us about the ghost of Officer Clark and the ghost killers? Captain Jones would only roll his eyes, convinced that the writer, as he supposed, had driven himself into a frenzy and rattled the unfortunate woman who had risked comforting him. No, and no again. Something else is needed here. Like then? Like then? What about the car? No one suspected. His affair was over. He had a new success waiting for him. You can't just cut everything out of your life. Hunter took Melissa's breathless body in his arms and carried it to the car. Then he went back for the bat and threw it far into the woods. He would sort it out afterwards. Now the main thing was to get rid of the body. The rain was pouring down. Nothing could be seen 5 meters away. Could the real killer be following him right now? Even if he was, he wouldn't be able to see anything unless he risked a face-to-face confrontation, and then he'd have all the anger Hunter had built up inside him. It's a good thing it's raining like this. He can do it fast. He'll come back, clean up the blood in the house. No one will come to visit him in this weather. No one has seen Melissa here either. No one knows she was here, even if she was on her way to see him. So what? She just got caught in a downpour, lost control, and slid off the road into the lake. Daniel had warned her that the road could be dangerous in the rain. It would all look natural. Carefully pressing the gas, the hunter drove to the lake shore. The wipers could not cope with the flow of water. The high beam only reflected from countless drops and blinded his eyes. And in this maelstrom, the stupid sign, "The road to town," came into view again. Hunter stopped and got out of the car, already thinking how best to push it down. Suddenly there were lights everywhere, side, front, and back. Bright spotlights flashed and a siren wailed. From the mouthpiece came a loud voice, ominously emphasized by the roll of thunder. "Hunter Wilson, step away from the car and get on your knees, or we will open fire." Captain Jones sat opposite and stared unblinkingly at the wet, from head to toe Hunter. The interrogation room was small, deceptively cozy, but built according to all the rules of the genre. A table with handcuffs, soundproof walls, wide tinted glass, behind which on this side there was nothing to see, but on the other side there was someone standing there, hearing and seeing everything, seeing and hearing all the nonsense Hunter had been talking for half an hour. "Then you insist that you did not kill Melissa?" The captain repeated calmly. "No, I told you. I heard a shot and ran to that house. Why would I kill her? Why would you kill your own wife?" "What?" Hunter exclaimed. This question came out of the blue, like a hammer hitting him on the head. "What are you talking about? What's my wife got to do with it?" "You know what it has to do with her." Jones persisted. "You were wrong to think that the case would be written off as an accident. The investigation has been going on all this time, and there is a witness." "What witness?" "I don't understand you." "You understand everything, Hunter, except maybe one thing. I don't think you realized how close friends Melissa and your wife were. Melissa knew all about your complicated relationship and that you'd driven your wife to hysterics. Margaret went to Melissa's that night, and now you've eliminated a witness." "A fight? Melissa confronted you?" "You lured her into a neighbor's house and hit her over the head with a bat." "No." No, Hunter yelled. "I didn't kill her and she didn't say anything to me." Oui. "Yeah, that's bullshit. Yes, I may have wanted Margaret dead, and I may have known the brakes were bad, and I may not have wanted them fixed at the service station, and I may have driven away in a bad car, but I had nothing to do with Melissa's death. So maybe you did or knew." "There's a big difference." "Yes, I did. And I had this picture of the accident in my mind, and I wanted it to happen." "Are you satisfied? Is that enough of my confession for you?" "But I didn't kill Melissa. That's crazy." "Yes, Hunter," the captain agreed. Delusions of your disturbed mind. You may not have killed Melissa, but you didn't kill Margaret. The problem is that you yourself ruined the brakes on your wife's car, and you convinced yourself that the brakes were defective through no fault of your own. Especially the car service said they never saw you in their eyes, and on the security cameras, your car was never there. You are a writer. Your inflamed mind has convinced you that you are not guilty of anything, and the brakes you ruined are supposedly an accident. But you screwed up on the most basic of things. You always write everything down in your diary. It's a habit of yours, and Melissa knew it all too well because she was in a relationship with you before you married Margaret. She had a year-long hunch that you were at fault, and she came to us to find out for sure. Melissa was convinced of her rightness when she read your confession in your diary about killing your wife. But now I assure you, you will feel better. You will finally understand yourself. Tomorrow we'll talk to you again. We'll discuss some details. But for now, I ask you to sign a non-departure order. We're reopening the criminal case. You'll have to write your novels behind bars if your guilt is proven in court. You will pardon us for this spectacle with both the house and Melissa, but any murder, as you know from your detectives, must be solved, and the criminal must receive a just punishment." Hunter looked at the captain and did not know what to say to him in reply. Yes, now he really realized what had happened a year ago to his wife. Hunter had convinced himself then that it was for the best if he wrote this scenario for himself. No guilt, no remorse. And he really believed that everything had happened by accident. His brain had simply forgotten that he had self-destructed his wife. But Melissa, what happened to her? And what play was the captain talking about? At that time, there were two people on the other side of the window, Melissa, alive and well, and a young officer who looked a lot like Clark, especially if you looked at him in the dim light. "Congratulations, Melissa," he said quietly. "I thought this show would never end. You shouldn't be a diver, but a movie star. He didn't even think you were just playing a part. Give it up." Finishing her cigarette, Melissa replied, "No one will ever get Margaret back anyway, and the bastard will get out of it one way or another. He became a popular writer. He has connections. Right, officer?" "It's hard to say now," the man shrugged. "Jones will work with him. He knows what he's doing." "Thanks for coming to us with your idea. For a captain, it's the last thing on his mind. I'm sure he'll want to retire as a major, but in any case, that writer Hunter Wilson has to answer for the murder of his wife to the fullest, and we'll see how it goes in court."
Subscribe and click the bell. Behind this psychiatric clinic in the city, and in general in the region, have long been bad rumors, like what happens in horror movies, and Michael had certainly heard about it. And when his mother and grandmother found out that he is an excellent student, and a graduate of medical school goes there to work as an orderly, one of them waved his hands. "Grandson, you're the only man left in the family. Don't go there. Michael, you know I'm from an ancient noble family. I may not have 1 million, but I'll find the money to pay for your internship abroad." "Grandma, what money? What abroad? I have to make my own way, just like my grandfather." And the boy nodded his head at the portrait of his grandfather hanging on the wall. And indeed, Michael had someone to look up to. His grandfather was a famous surgeon, and his father, who died in Afghanistan, blew himself up on a mine, saving the military. And so he decided to become a doctor, but not a surgeon like his grandfather and father, but a psychiatrist. Why psychiatry? My mother joked in the first year of school, "But Mom, if the body my grandfather and father studied, so to speak, in detail, then psychiatry is a real field for research, a Klondike." "Yes, you're a researcher. I hope. Psychiatry isn't contagious." "Oh, Mom, don't worry. It's not like it's the flu or anything. Maybe I can find my own unique method of therapy for mentally ill patients. Yeah, and bring people like Chikatilo back into society." "So Adriana, please don't bring it up," said the grandmother, stepping in for her grandson. The case of this serial maniac was then on the rumor, and the whole country was following him. But the mother reacted too painfully to her. Michael understood her because her own sister Adriana, and his own aunt, the only close person, killed by an unknown assailant, and the culprit was never found. The investigator then said that it could be a maniac, but now in many women saw negative elements of society, especially if they stayed in such institutions as their own city institution for the mentally ill. "Mom, you are an adult, and you understand that it is better to treat such people, recognize them as sane, and then pass a sentence, than to spend money on them to keep them in such houses as ours for years. And you're still defending him." The mother was outraged, but she knew her son's temper. "Michael, you're just like your father, just as stubborn. All right, but don't complain to me about anything. Adriana, don't worry. My grandson will complain to his legal grandmother." "You mean me?" Betty gently ruffled the thick red curls of his favorite grandson. "Grandma, but I'm not a boy anymore. Not a boy, but not yet a husband. So listen to your mother, but also to me sometimes." So they lived in the old Tsar's house, where they had a 5-room apartment with its own fireplace and a large library, luxurious balconies, which still kept traces of the old stucco. This house was in the very center of the city, stood on a small hill, and was considered one of the elite in the city. For it, even many rich men and millionaires, even one criminal. Authority gave crazy money for the family to sell their apartment. "No way," said Betty's grandmother, who was considered the head of the family and whose word was final. "This apartment will serve my great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren. So just stop asking me stupid questions like if I want to sell the apartment and leave me alone." That's all she said a few years ago to a city criminal mastermind. And strangely enough, but after that they really didn't bother them anymore. They didn't even start organizing invasion raids, as it often happened in those times. That's how they lived. Michael, dreaming of becoming a famous psychiatrist, and his mother and grandmother, whom he madly loved and idolized. No, there were girls in his life, and even an older woman, but he loved few. Yes, there was a crush, even a feeling like love, but nothing serious. He went on studying, falling in love, dating. Now he was interning at a psychiatric clinic in their town. Yes, they had talked the most horrible and heartbreaking, up to the fact that their orderlies and doctors have fun with mentally ill beauty. But no one could prove it. "What do you want me to do?" Michael asked his old friend Benjamin, who told him all this. "Do. I really have to go over the border, as my grandmother says. But you know, you'd have to sell the last of it. And what would I do in that prosperous Europe? And you realize their methods and ours are probably incompatible. So that's where it stands. I'm already used to the realities of our medicine and psychiatry, in particular, as well as methods of therapy. What's a handful of pills? I'd rather have a shot in the vein, or even for some freaks in general. Orbital lobotomy. You're a bloodthirsty Benjamin. I'm way ahead of you. Aha. That's why I went into dentistry, so I could yank my patient's teeth with a vengeance." And the guy was soon making a grimace that made them both laugh. A healthy laugh. Crooked faces like first graders. It was normal. In their practice, doctors, they are such and black humor that help them endure the specifics and difficulties of the job. Often the lack of weekends, when there is no one on shifts, and you do all the work for 3 people so you cannot die long, or even go crazy and become like his future charges patients in a psychiatric clinic. Yeah, Ethan, I probably should have chosen dentistry like you, and my grandmother insisted that my senior year I choose dentistry or gynecology. But that's just not my thing, you know. I see, Michael. Then you'll have to go to me for dental care and one of our girls for gynecology. I'll give you a headache. All right, buddy, I gotta go home. I gotta get ready for my first day of private dentistry tomorrow. I'm on the phone for now." Michael nodded, and after shaking hands, they parted ways. He had to go to his mental hospital tomorrow. Then, it was worth it to come home early, to pack a bag, and for once, not to sit in front of the TV until night, to sleep. Already at home he had dinner and brewed himself a fragrant tea. Michael sat down at the computer, an old computer brought from Europe, but still capable of much computer brought to him under the order from a friend of his grandmother for his birthday. When Michael was in his second year of study, and the guy's joy was unbounded. "Grandma, this is a real treasure." Luckily, the guy had no limit. And now he sat down at the computer, started the system, and connected the internet. Yeah, the internet is power. The ability to communicate with the world, to learn a lot. And now he decided to keep his own electronic diary of his internship at work, including everything he saw and heard, what methods were used, and what the doctors achieved. Maybe I'll even write a dissertation based on this diary. Not many secrets this asylum hides. Is this your institution for the mentally ill? Grandma came into the room and put a tray with a huge tea and sweet spoons on the table. Yes, Grandma, I'm thinking of keeping a diary. Maybe I'll see something interesting, and there are strange things going on in your almshouse. Grandma, do you know something? Tell me, please. I know something. Betty sat down on her grandson's bed and thought about it. That sometimes I see girls and young women in weird outfits, but they also have ribbons in their hair. Grandma. Well, the outfits are ordinary. Hospital outfits. Maybe some suits came from humanitarian aid. And the ribbons? Maybe one of the nurses got sick. No. Grandson, something else. Outfits. Grandma thought for a moment, and then said, like in adult movies, a dress, short stockings, and netting. Somehow the guy raised an eyebrow in surprise. Strangely, he had passed by this place many times, but he hadn't really paid attention to the patients. His grandmother, on the other hand, did. She looked at her grandson carefully and then continued. And about the ribbons, they're weird too. How can I explain it to you? Well, what caught your attention? Just tell me the first thing you noticed. The guy felt like a detective, but he was already wondering what his astute grandmother had seen. Betty pressed her lips together and then gave out. They're red with glitter. So what? Grandma, it's bright and beautiful. I guess crazy people like that. I don't know about that. In my time, so to speak, pre-revolutionary ribbons like this were stuffed in the hair of girls of easy virtue in brothels. And here, they'd walk around like that, and they'd be highlighted with ribbons, so to speak. It's not human. You shouldn't make the poor and disadvantaged look like the poor and disadvantaged. Ugh. And also such ribbons flew hair only young and beautiful. Grandma, you're my Agatha Christie. Really, how many times have I walked by and just not paid attention? It's impossible not to pay attention to such an inferential outfit. All right. Well, I take what you said, and I'll pay attention. Maybe I'll uncover some kind of world conspiracy. And the guy smiled his beautiful smile, but he didn't know how close he was to the truth. This hospital was a place for the mildly insane. As the doctors would say, those who didn't require enhanced confinement. That's why the patients could walk by themselves in the equipped yard of the institution, awarded with a fence. But the guy would learn about it later, when he would encounter the most horrible and disgusting thing that could happen in his professional life. Monday turned out to be surprisingly sunny and similar, especially after a night of threatening rain and rain that walled the city. Yes, Michael thought. Waking up in the night and looking out the window to rain like that could wash away the whole city and my psychotic charges with it. But the morning was clear and sunny, and there was practically nothing left from the traces of rain, except for broken branches and leaves on the ground. Yeah, it's a lot of work for a janitor, the boy said aloud. That's right, said the janitor of the Sheck grandmother Sophia, who has been cleaning the yard. Since 5 o'clock, she's already cleaned so much, and still waving and waving the broom. Good luck to you. And the guy, throwing his backpack on his shoulder, went to his new place of practice. On the approach to the psychiatric clinic, the guy decided to walk around it a bit, on the other side, so that he could see the place where their patients usually strolled, and to pay attention to what his grandmother was talking about yesterday. Indeed, there were several girls walking in the courtyard, dressed in very revealing outfits with brightly colored ribbons in their hair. But the strangest thing was not only the orderlies, but also the head doctor and his 2 deputies were standing aside. They looked at their charges and smilingly discussed something. And the head doctor was looking at Kathy, a new patient who had been brought in a few days ago, a victim of hypnosis, or rather a failed experiment of a psychopath. A doctor who practiced his trance technique on her. Yeah, the guy thought. Such things happen in the practice of doctors. As the grief doctor told the law enforcers, this method he tried to muffle her inner hunger. What kind of hunger? One of the investigators asked the doctor. Sexual hunger. She was just obsessed with men, always wanting sex. I tried to bring her back to a normal life, although so far I had to cure her with this method by my refinement, to cure her. Or maybe it was just you decorating her like that. I was saving her from herself. The doctor was sure he was doing good, but, as Michael thought to himself, Having heard the girl's story and the doctor's testimony, he was no less crazy than his victim, whom he had turned into a vegetable. Yes, thought the new orderly from one prison, or rather office, psycho, experimenter to the clinic, or rather, a study, a psycho, an experimenter in a clinic where she was looked upon as a subject of pleasures and possible molestation. Well, if you've got your eye on her, I'm gonna have to keep an eye on you, Kathy. Now I realize my grandmother was right about something. You don't dress patients like that. This isn't a catwalk, it's a clinic. Michael took out a pack of cigarettes and smoked, even though he'd only dabbled before. As his downstairs neighbor, Uncle Benjamin, who'd been in the camps for years, would say, he was translating product, also a colorful type. The guy remembered about him. But in reality, as he was an Urka and a political prisoner in the past owned such a 3-room apartment. Michael even once asked him jokingly, who will get your chambers and jacuzzi? To which he replied, squint your eyes at him. Don't be jealous. I won this house with my teeth. And the neighbor showed his not too healthy strong teeth. Don't look at my teeth. I can still do a lot. And the apartment is my mother's inheritance, not the state's. Believe me. Uncle Benjamin, but you don't have children. Who told you I don't? I had a daughter, but she died in childbirth. So there's only one beloved grandson. But why doesn't he visit you? Where is he? Do you even know? Because he lives abroad. My daughter married an Arab. She fell in love and went to the Emirates. To tell the truth, she lived like a cheese in butter. I wouldn't give her that. But I guess you have to pay for everything. And I guess she paid the price when she gave birth. I'm sorry, Uncle Benjamin, I really didn't know. Hold on. There's a grandson. Have you even seen him? Yes, he came to my daughter's funeral. To her grave, to be exact. She converted to Islam and was buried on the day she died. So I only got the grave. I'm sorry. You're welcome. My grandson's growing up and my daughter's husband calls me and shows me his grandson via video link. He keeps asking me to come over, but I can't leave the house. Yes, and here I am among neighbors as my own and smiling through tears. Neighbor went to his apartment. Michael stood smoking under the fence net and did not understand why he remembered him. But fate would once again bring the neighbors together in this case, albeit in a very unusual way. And now Michael stood smoking, looking, and could not make a step and continue his way. Maybe throw it to hell under his nose, said the guy. And then he almost jumped. On his shoulder lay the hand of William, the lead doctor, clinic, and supervisor of Michael's practice, who had seen the guy get off at the bus stop, how he had smoked, stopping under an old lime tree. And as he watched a group of paramedics walking in the courtyard of patients of doctors, laughing them among themselves, probably at some oily joke. Who are you gonna leave? Certainly not the practice at our fun and games place, but I think you're overdoing it on the fun and games. No, it's definitely that kind of black doctor humor. It is so, sort of so humor. The doctor smiled and took his ward under his arm and led him towards the psychiatric hospital, slowly but surely moving him towards the horrors that were going on inside its walls. The doctor had already made the decision to either involve Michael in his games or simply deprive him of his sanity if he did not agree to participate. Why him? It's simple. Michael is a new man in their collective one not so long ago, by chance, and he's strong for his age, plus handsome. Here is such a boy handsome, which is exactly suitable for filming spicy movies. Already in the clinic, the head doctor Noah and William took him through all the buildings, floors, and wards. Yes, the views are not the best, and emotions are not the brightest. Why should he be surprised, though? He knew where he was going. Michael was tormented by his grandmother's reasoning, but he knew if he asked that question directly, he'd be laughed at. But at the most, he'd get suspended. And the guy would never find out. Noah asked Michael over tea at the resident. There are all sorts of rumors about this clinic, in particular, mystical rumors. What do you have to say about that? Oh, Michael, you're a medical student, but you talk like a philology student who wants folklore. Or are you afraid of the ghost of the old empress or mother? The mother superior who drowned a truck in our pond at night. There's even a pond here. The boy's amazement was unparalleled. How long has he lived here in this town? I knew of clinics in the neighborhood, but the fact that there's also a pond. Remember the old movie about the Three Musketeers? Well, we have a lively pond just like that. It was organized by the previous head doctor. His wife worked as a landscape designer. So they set it up. We have a lily pond here. It's beautiful. There were fish swimming in it, but I guess our climate didn't suit them. They died out over the winter. But our patients don't care whether they're fish or lilies. And Ethan, an orderly with huge fists and a face resembling a tango arena, laughed as Michael's laughter made him shudder, and the doctors simply did not pay attention to him. And why do they tolerate such people in the clinic? Although on the other hand, there are some violent people who can't be subdued without physical force. Yeah, but Ethan's rudeness sometimes got to Michael, as did the thought of having to work with someone like that. Ethan, you show Michael to your office, where he can change his clothes, leave his things in the lockers and all that. He's only here for a couple months, so to speak, a couple months internship. But it's still got to be determined. Ethan nodded his head and waved his huge fist at Michael. Michael didn't show his displeasure. Let it be. A couple of months could be tolerated. And then he was promised to be taken to the second city as a staff psychiatrist, so he didn't worry about it too much. Michael obediently went down to the basement with Ethan and went to the very back of the clinic. Here, the orderlies had set up a room for a locker room and a kind of sports corner where you can hit a punching bag and play chess and dominoes. Don't be shy. Michael, take any locker that's not open. We have a lot of open seats right now, so let's get settled in. Why do so few people want to work at the clinic? Michael started asking questions from afar. I mean, who wants to hang out with a psycho? A lot of people think of it as a contagion. Being a psycho too. I just don't know any other job. Although at one time, just like you, I studied medicine. What did you study for? An orderly, that's what I studied. And my uncle put me to work here. My uncle. He's Noah. You've seen him. He's our chief of medicine. Good acquaintances, the boy thought, but he didn't say anything. Michael changed his clothes and began to get ready for his shift. The shift went relatively smoothly, and the next morning, the guy threw his backpack on his shoulders and left the clinic building. The sun was shining brightly, and there was nothing to portend any trouble, and all the things he had changed his mind about yesterday. Michael, it seemed like a fairy tale or fantasy. But really, what kind of fairy tales are fairy tales? We live in our developed world with computers, cameras on every corner. Even if there was something going on here, it would have been made public a long time ago. Michael, good morning. William called out to the guy and extended his hand to greet him and got straight to the point. How was your shift? Smoke. I don't smoke. Thank you. Yesterday it was just a dalliance, but the shift. Thank you. Everything went smoothly. William, can I make a personal request if I'm not interrupting something more important? Sure. Yes, of course. Anything I can do. Could you show me that pond you told me about yesterday? Wow. I guess you got caught up in the story last night. Come on. It's in the backyard. I'll show you around. I gotta be honest, you can't see it from the street. It took me a while to find it myself. It's so hidden, it's creepy. Is this place really inhabited? The center of Izhevsk. The doctor looked at him with a slight chuckle and said nothing, but waved his hand and led him deep into the park area of the hospital. Yeah, it's a bit of a wilderness, and that the most strange noise of cars from the street was not heard, although the clinic itself was located at the crossroads of quite busy central city roads. How quiet is it? And strangely enough, you can't hear much traffic from the road. Yes, you're right, Michael. You've noticed it's quiet. And here's the twig itself, and the head doctor spread the branches with his hands and let the boy go ahead. It's beautiful. Before, Michael opened a pond, laid out of stones behind burned black lilies, around which willows grew. And what was the most amazing thing? There were several statues in antique style of girls, hunting or carrying jugs on their shoulders. He had not seen such statues for a long time. Oh, it's beautiful. And notice the angle and the shot. You could even make a movie. What kind of horror movie have you seen in our cellars? There's no such thing as a cellar. Why? There are some. Yes, imagine that. And they lead to the local Cathedral of the Transfiguration, which is across the street from us. Are these cellars or cellars? I don't know. They lead to the monastery, and they say the monks at our clinic have the right people. And all because it wouldn't occur to anyone to look for a healthy person in a mental institution. Then there's been some kind of collapse in some places. Now these passages are impassable. That's for sure. No one's gonna come in here willingly. And then he noticed on the opposite bank the figure of a girl in a racy outfit. Kathy, he remembered her, because she had been brought here on the day when he had come to see the head doctor and applied for an internship at this clinic. The girl herself was not in the state she was in at the time. She was screaming at the doctors that the psychiatrist wanted to kill her. She's hearing voices and everything. That Kathy suffers from inner voices and a hypertrophied sex drive. Well, that's what her previous doctor said. Who knows? So far, the girl hasn't said a word. Why is she dressed like that? Short dress, fishnet stockings, ribbon in her hair. You know, Michael, it's one of my methods of letting the patient choose what they want. And by the way, where'd you get that outfit? That's a good question. Like many theatrical costumes, it was left to us by a theater. Exactly the theater. The director was jailed for some dark deeds, he and his wife. And the actors just ran away. And since the theater was near us, it's not a waste. And they were all dressed like royalty. Yes, imagining you as Henry Valois or Peter the Great. Michael, you're joking. But by the way, we had a wonderful carnival night here on New Year's Eve. And there was even a story about us in the paper. I hope it wasn't in a good context that a disguised Napoleon was walking around town claiming to be the real chief medical officer. No, we're all understanding people with a sense of humor. So we just hung around the Christmas tree. That one over there, by the way, by the entrance. And you know, people even took pictures with us on New Year's Eve. Yeah, that was fun. Thank you for the tour. I'm gonna go home and get some sleep. Thursday again for 24 hours. Michael, don't try too hard. You can't do all the work. You're a young guy. I nodded my head. But I thought to myself, no, I'm going to get you out of this. I think you're hiding something. Dear head doctor, but you don't need to know that. I had dinner tonight and sat down at the computer. Michael quickly made the first entries in his diary and then began to look for information about the local clinic. And indeed, there was a lot of information about it. Strangely enough, there was a lot of information about it, and with a very negative connotation. Murders, suicides, and strange deaths of both patients and doctors. Yes, there was a lot to work on and a lot to find out. But it was Kathy that bothered him the most. And he thought to himself, why not keep a sneaky eye on her room? The girl herself. Not without reason the head doctor was looking at her with such olive eyes. Grandma, the boy called out to his grandmother. Why did you shop like that? You won't let me watch my favorite TV show. What did you want? Grandma, I saw a girl at the clinic today. She was a victim of an incompetent hypnotist and suffered as a result. But that's not the point. She was wearing the outfit you mentioned, short dress, stockings, and a sash. Not surprising. One of your executives must have had their eye on her. I mean, she's new. She's a young girl, too. I take it. So you're going to steal her? No, Grandma. I just want to keep an eye on her room. It's on the first floor, so it won't be a problem. To do anything, you have to have proof. That's what I'm required to do. Really, Michael, I'm old. I'm not going to play Sherlock Holmes with you. I'm more of a Mrs. Hudson. Grandma, that's not what I mean. Just cover for me in front of Mom. I'm gonna go over to the clinic tonight, stake out the windows, so to speak. I found a military A in Grandpa's closet. Okay, if anything, I'll tell Mom you're home already asleep. She's on call today anyway, so she won't be home. But you're my grandson, please. Don't get into any trouble. Okay. Michael nodded his head and poked the old lady on the cheek. He went back to his computer. What's going on at the clinic? How was your shift? The old woman was still interested in how true or not the rumors were. The rumors about the asylum. Yeah, Grandma. It's okay. I told you it was nothing like that. No, it's not. Our head doctor showed me the old pond on the grounds today, the one with the black lilies. Grandma didn't tell me about it. I went there and saw it because the wife of the former head doctor was my friend, and the pond itself is her creation. But the doctor didn't tell you that in the same pond they found the wife of the former one drowned. The guy shook his head, looked at his grandmother in surprise, but there's knee-deep water, and that's it. And this is the strangest thing. Her body was lying with her head in the water. She was submerged in the water, but her arms and legs were lying flat along her torso. They took a sturdy, adequate soldier and put her face down. That's all. And then they found water from the pond in his lungs. No signs of violence on the body. If that's what you're asking, it's odd that she came in, lay down, and swallowed the water to death. Drowned of her own volition. The guy was being sarcastic, but looking at the expression on his grandmother's face, he immediately faltered. Betty did not tolerate unnecessary words and jokes, and therefore immediately warned her grandson. Yes, Michael, death is strange. But if she did it herself, then she had a reason. And maybe even her own husband is the same as your current boss's overbearing. There's nothing to cure them. Maybe, under the old doctor, he and his brothers also had fun with innocent girls, and his wife found out and drowned them both. So, what of it? Or maybe who drowned them? But really, she won't become a ghost of a ghost, will she? Maybe she wouldn't. But believe me, there's something scary going on out there. And I'll tell you honestly, this new girl isn't worth the danger she's bringing upon herself. Trust me. The Brotherhood of Doctors, it's like that. Everyone protects each other. And even if they do something to her, that you can get to the bottom of it. But understand, a doctor will not testify against a doctor. So get on your nerves and leave her in there. At least I'll get her out and save her that way. All right. Michael, don't yell. I hear you. I accept your position. But I'm trying to warn you. You're putting yourself in a lot of danger. I understand all that. That's why I'm telling you where I'm going and what I intend to do. Betty nodded and stood up, heading for the door. She was worried about her grandson, but she realized she couldn't keep the young and hot guy away. So the woman simply stood on the doorstep and turned and said to Michael, "What if you take Uncle Benjamin, our neighbor from the second floor, to help you? He's old, but he's lean. And with his criminal record, he'd be a big help. I'll think about it. But it's not a bad idea. Although I'll tell you right away, I'll have to see for myself, do some recon, and then I'll tell them what's going on. Even if I go to him now, what can I say? Uncle Benjamin is there in the clinic raping women and many other things. And he'll tell me. Prove it. Just words. And I don't really believe it all myself. Just because a place is weird and old doesn't mean you can't ring all the bells. Yeah, There's too many girls, there's too many crazy people, and there's too many masquerades. But it's all right. And the grandmother left the room, closing the door a little behind her. Michael leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Uncle Benjamin is a criminal, but the grandmother is right. His experience and his nose for crime might help him. And an extra set of hands and eyes can always help. But first, you have to go and see for yourself, and then you can go to your neighbor. All right, let's get ready. Michael threw a flashlight and a bottle of water into his backpack. Binoculars with good German optics can take a camera. What for? Basically, there's a cell phone. You can take video and photos with it. Okay, that's fine for the first time. Anyway, I'm not going to go in there. And throwing it on his shoulders, Michael went out into the corridor and began to study. The sounds Betty came out of his room and looked at his offspring carefully. You're coming. Yes, Grandma. Don't worry. I've got the phone, but don't call. I'll call you if I need to. In the meantime, lock it up. I think I'll be on the train in a couple of hours. 20 minutes to get there. An hour and a half and back. 20 minutes. So look, it'll be 3 hours. All right. Grandson, but please be careful. If anything happens to me, your mother will rip my head off. Michael smiled at his favorite person and kissed her. He went outside. It was getting dark. What's so surprising? After work he washed up, then ate and slept, and now full of strength can and observe. The guy smiled, thought to himself that he should have gone not to the doctor, but probably to the investigators. Here is a confirmation of his words. A patrol car passed by and lit up the road with flashing beacons, but it alarmed the guy. No, not the car itself, not the flashing lights. It was the fact that the policeman stopped it around the corner and got out quietly, covering the door. They slammed it shut, as usual, quietly slipped through the hole in the fence of the psychiatric clinic, and went just as quietly, whispering among themselves. Wow, the cops are also in business. And the young medic's bewilderment had no limit. Did these columns, as his grandmother would say, come here too? Wow. Now, it's not just medical malpractice anymore. It's a group of gangs. And that's what he's encountered in practice. Come on. Maybe he just made a mistake, and the police came here on a signal, so to speak, to check what's going on here. But still, these two were acting weird. Uncharacteristic. Michael slowly went in the direction of the secret eye. In the fence, jumped in the chassis, hiding behind the dense vegetation, and abundantly growing along this fence. That was a plus right now, and it wasn't exactly a starry night. So the guy slowly crept toward the ominous, overhanging park clinic. This 3-story old pre-revolutionary building was an eyesore in the city. It was going to be demolished long ago, moving the facility to the outskirts. But apparently, it wasn't worth it for the high-ranking officials to go there in search of hidden pleasures. Come on, come in here, quietly said one policeman, and let the other one inside. The basement. Wow, they got the basement entrance open. I wonder who's on shift today. An old orderly with a long history of alcohol abuse, or lying. Another one of the orderlies with a huge fist. When Michael himself asked about the door to the basement and the padlock, the head doctor secretly smiled and said, "This is the entrance to our basement paradise. And is it like growing marijuana there?" Michael decided to make a joke, but I guess the joke didn't work. The doctor looked at him sideways and said it wasn't pot. It was something else, but it's too early for him to know. Everything will show and tell later. And now they just let outsiders into this forbidden paradise. Maybe they are part-time. Security guards? Michael chuckled under his nose and began to approach the clinic building even more quietly. The windows of the wards on the first floor glowed with a dim light. It was the way the duty lights burned. And the light itself was enough to see what was going on in the wards. The guy intuitively approached the window of the room of the new patient, Kathy, and from surprise, almost dumbfounded on the spot. Guy saw her sitting on the bed, dressed in a short school drill dress and with bows in her hair. Yeah, the guy almost whistled in surprise. And apparently, the girl heard his exclamation and looked out the window. Michael intercepted her gaze for a second. He was devastated. Apparently, she'd been pre-sedated with sedatives. But at the same time, there was a silent plea for help. But then, Liam and the doctor in charge entered the room, and the boy sat down instantly so as not to be seen. Michael sat under the window and listened intently to what was going on in the room itself. He heard the footsteps of two men and the creaking of a bed. Then the words of the head doctor. "Hello, Kathy. You're already dressed as well as you can be. Now let's go down to the basement with me and Liam. You'll find a lot of interesting things there." The basement where the two policemen went. Apparently, they had some sort of organized pleasure nook down there. And that's where they took her, drugged her with psychotropics. But what to do? The guy quietly sank to the ground and put his hands around his head. What to do? What to do? And then the front door creaked and Michael squeezed into the ground. 3 men came out of them and headed towards the basement. Good night was dark, and the yard of the clinic was not illuminated. Therefore, he simply was not noticed. But only the girl turned back, looked in his direction, and cried. Tears rolled silently down her face. Michael heard Noah begin to quietly soothe the girl and told the orderly, "Liam at the school, to her in the basement for another dose of sedative. We didn't want her to wake up at the right moment." And the chief of police wasn't happy with his new doll. "Yeah, sure, Noah. Let's get her in and give her a quick shot." And the trio began to make their way down to the basement. Michael had one single desire: to break into the basement and snatch Kathy out of the hands of doctors and cops. But he realized how impossible that would be. No, he was not intimidated by the company, the doctors and the cops, to do their dark deeds. But he realized they'd just smash him there. And that would be it. And no one will know where his grave is. Call the militia. What will he say there? The head doctor and a policeman raping a mentally ill patient won't believe him. And even if they do, what's next? But the brigade will arrive on a call. And what? Nothing. If the police come to such costume parties, it means that the management is aware of it, and at least the case will be closed. At the most, they can either kill him in the same basement and bury him here or put him in jail for something. I mean, even if it's for abusing Kathy. So think, Michael, think. Maybe you're imagining things. Yeah. And the cops are here for nothing. But at that very moment, the basement door opened and a policeman came running out. "Vasia," he shouted, "I've been away for a couple of hours. There's an emergency at the police station, but I'll be back later. Leave me that girl for later." And the policeman rushed to the car. The guy heard the engine roar and the tires skid across the sand. But the strangest thing was that from the cellar no one answered him, and no one had ever closed the door. It wasn't locked. It's called come in. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Whoever wants in and whoever wants out. Michael rushed to the cellars and started to go down the stairs, listening to every sound. But he heard nothing, neither footsteps nor any other sounds. There were supposed to be at least 4 people down there. And they certainly weren't singing lullabies. But maybe it was for the best. The boy opened the cellar door and slipped inside. The corridor was sparsely lit, and there was a pantry open right next to the entrance. The guy peeked into it just in case, to make sure there was no one there. And in case of emergency, he could hide in this room. Yes, there are shelves and bears in principle a place for a hiding place. But at that very moment, at the end of the corridor, footsteps were heard. It was the guest of the night police and the head doctor. The boy immediately recognized the figure of his superior. They were talking quietly about something, and as they approached, the boy could hear what they were talking about. What he heard made him not just overcome, but terrified to the point of truly experiencing fear not only for the poor girl, but for his own life. "Noah, thank you for the welcome. But you see, the warden's gone. We've had an emergency at the council since this morning. The commission's here, so we're saving Kathy for dessert, so to speak. Yes, you understand correctly. Everything is normal. No excesses or incidents. No one is interested in anything. Yes, in principle, everything's fine. Except we got a new orderly coming in for an internship. We didn't apply for the internship, but he did. So, they're interested in the job, and the clinic in particular. Why are our patients dressed so oddly? Of course, like you said, it's all been blamed on the tour and the theater we had a year ago. And then they disbanded it. But I don't think he believed it. So what do you suggest? Maybe we should press him a little so he doesn't stick his nose where it doesn't belong. No, I think I can handle it. And you know, it's normal to be questioned about our clinic. Michael listened and realized it was about him. His breath cleared, and he even found it hard to breathe. And as luck would have it, the couple stopped near the open door to the storeroom, where the new employee was hiding behind the racks with his colleagues. The policeman looked into the storeroom, but seeing nothing, quietly said to the head doctor, "Okay, Noah, let's postpone our sit-downs for the time being. Lie down while holding this girl. The chief liked her, and the school drill outfit matches. We'll be there in a couple days. In the meantime, we'll be in touch. Call me if you need anything." The head doctor didn't say anything. He escorted the guest outside and returned a couple minutes later. Michael, all these minutes, which seemed like hours to him, sat and did not breathe, although his heart was pounding frantically and was ready to jump out of his chest. And this breathing and heartbeat, it seemed to the lad to be striking a bell in the silence. But there was nothing he could do about it. The boy heard the head doctor pass by his cell and head deep into the corridor, muttering something to himself. After a few minutes, he looked out of the door and, seeing no one, slipped out into the street. He breathed in the cool air of the night and took a few deep breaths in and out and began to make his way toward the dead vine. At the fence, Michael walked slowly, not even looking around, being in slight shock at everything he saw. What could be going on in there? What did I see there? Nothing. Just heard the doctor and the cops talking about something. But I don't know what they were talking about. Maybe it's some kind of videotape as part of a police investigation. The guy was trying to drown out the thoughts that kept popping into his head, and he'd heard of costume parties like this a long time ago. But to have minds devoid of girls and women take part in it, there was no such thing. All right, who am I kidding? Trying to fool. There's definitely something going on in that basement that's scary and illegal. And it's got to stop. Poor girls. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to do. He'd have to go to Uncle Benjamin. That old bastard will surely tell him what to do, won't he? How? He'll help. The guy did not notice how he reached the house, how he went up to the floor and opened the doors with his keys, closing them quietly. Michael leaned against the wall and from powerlessness and experience simply slid to the floor. Grandma came out of the room at that moment and flicked the light switch. The bright light blinded the guy. And realized, "Grandma, why are you awake?" He tried to look normal, but apparently the expression on his face told the old lady everything. "Why? You want me to tell you why? What happened? Tell me." "You're white as chalk." "Grandma, I don't want to. I wish I was like this right now. Come on, go take a shower to wash off the negativity. Then we'll go to the table. I spared a cutlet, and I'll pour you one of my own." The guy did not argue, and simply went to the bathroom, pulled off all the clothes and scattered them on the way. When in the bathroom heard the sound of water, Betty collected the guy's things and threw them into the washing machine. No dirt to lay around. I'll wash everything. Tomorrow. When Michael came out of the bathroom, there was a late dinner and a bottle of tincture on the table. The woman poured him a shot and handed it to him without saying anything. Nor did the grandson ask anything. He took it quietly and knocked it over. All at once. Take the cutlets, mashed potatoes, salad. Let's eat. The guy sat down at the table without saying a word. He poured himself a second shot of olive and tipped it, just as quietly, and started on the homemade cutlets. He ate and thought, should he tell his grandmother of his suspicions? But Betty was not so foolish, as modern young people might think. I take it Kathy had gotten into the local psychiatric brothel and was simply being kept on psychotropic drugs. Michael chewed and nodded his head and simply couldn't drop a word. Not because he was eating, but because he was choked with emotion, and he didn't want to upset his grandmother. But his grandmother was not stupid and immediately realized everything as soon as his grandson entered the house. You know, grandmother, there are not only doctors involved, there are also the police, and most likely, the very top. They came here today, twirled around and left. It's like an emergency in the department. So they didn't stay the night. And this girl. And then Michael shook from the experience. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and he couldn't stop. How could they do that? It's not just they're renting prostitutes, who know what they're in for and where they're going. And all this with mentally ill women. How so? Michael, I get it. That's why I told you not to go there, but you wouldn't listen. And now you've got to figure out how to deal with it. You're not going to go to the police. You said it yourself. The whole chain of command is tied up. So what do we do? You can't go with a machine gun against everyone. You don't have to do it yourself. I told you. Go talk to our neighbor tomorrow. You know, the one below us, Benjamin. He's a thief. He's old school, I think. Plus, he's got a grudge against the police. So if he doesn't help, he'll certainly tell me what to do and who to turn to. The guy nodded his head and poured himself another olive. He drank and couldn't taste it. Slowly he digested all that he had seen and heard, thinking how he should proceed. But Babushkina's spit turned out to be quite strong, and already in half an hour the guy was pecking his nose. Go to bed, my sorrow. Tomorrow mother will come, and you with red eyes sleep. And then I'll cook for you for the evening. Pour the stuffed cabbage. With all this good stuff you'll go and ask your neighbor for advice. Grandma, thank you. I'm going. Michael only laid his head on the pillow, as he was immediately dreaming. He slept and did not dream, though emotions so and so raged inside him. But apparently the young body could handle giving his head a rest. Indeed, he slept until almost lunchtime. And when he got up at 12 o'clock, he found no one home in the kitchen. All he caught was a note from his mother. Say, lunch on the table from his grandmother, stuffed cabbage in her purse, cash in the fridge in the back. We had a snack in Russia too. Michael went down to the second floor and called Uncle Benjamin's apartment. He didn't open the door right away, but he wouldn't let the guys in. Michael, do you want something? Uncle Benjamin, my grandmother gave you Golutsov, and he pointed to the bottle. And then I'd like to talk to you about a sensitive matter. The old one stomped on the doorstep. He liked Betty's stuffed cabbage, and it wasn't nice to say no to a neighbor. It wasn't proper. But he had guests he didn't want Michael to meet. The guy heard he had a stranger as a guest, maybe the lady of his heart, and he's here with his own problems. Uncle Benjamin, if I'm interrupting, I'm sorry, but can I come back later? Yes. Michael, I'm sorry, guest, come back at 8 o'clock. And here's Betty. A special thank you. Her stuffed cabbage is a work of art. Benjamin nodded his head and closed the door gently. Yeah, the stuffed cabbage and cash came in handy. There would be something to feed and drink an old friend. He came unexpectedly, and frankly speaking, the Skull's visit surprised Benjamin and made him a little wary. And what does the skull need from old Kogan? And a vagabond. Yeah, maybe our old friend stomping on the doorstep for starters. Hopefully, the doorstep isn't where friends have a business conversation. Oh no, sure, come on in. Except there's nothing to buy. But I did not come here to eat. The restaurant will not feed. If you want strong tea with your girlfriends, I won't refuse. You owe me tea and my girlfriends. When Benjamin went to put the kettle on, the doorbell rang. It was Michael, but not the landlord. Neither did his guests know about it. Both were wary. But since Benjamin had long since retired and felt no guilt, he boldly opened the door. After talking to his neighbor for a few minutes, he returned to the room with the fools and the cash. Oh, I see the delivery service is working perfectly, joked the skull. Yes, in the face of the upstairs neighbor. He came in to talk some business. So I brought this to butter the old man up. But I asked him to wait till tonight. In the meantime, try these homemade stuffed cabbage. By the way, and cherry is a delight. The men sat down at the table, poured a shot glass each and, having drunk, had a snack. And how not to drink, because it would make the conversation easier. Benjamin looked at the old thief in the law and quietly asked what brought you to me. You didn't just come 10 years after our last case. Yes, I did. And for good reason. I'll tell you right off the bat. I was put in charge of this town not that long ago, but I think you already know that. Now, I've heard rumors that young girls and women have been going missing in this town for the last few years. Well, you can blame it on anything, although all roads lead to your local mental institution. You know what I'm getting at? Yeah, I've heard bad things about her too, Benjamin said, and poured another round of shots. But how can I tell you, Skull? They're just rumors. You know, you can't do anything without proof. That's true. But in addition to the fact that young girls have been brought into this almshouse and treated for whatever reason, the cops have been frequenting it in recent months. They probably set up a brothel there together with the doctors and have fun there. And how not to party? It's a hell of a roof. Skull, are you sure? The old watcher nodded his head and threw a piece of fool into his mouth. He poured himself and his friend a shot for cream. What was there to say? Home-cooked food, still, that delicacy and luxury. And he, as an old thief who had spent most of his life in colonies and prisons, understood that. But that's not what we're talking about now. The daughter of a street Petersburg authority figure is missing. And so far, all roads lead here. You see, Alex's daughter is missing. Well, you remember him. He was on my team. Then he retired. He's got a family, but his daughter's missing. And all roads lead here to this mental institution. Yeah, and you said she could be in that new house. What about him? What did he do? He's been raising his own, and he's almost filed a police report. But nothing. Benjamin sat and thought about it. He really heard from his friends that in the last couple of years young beauties began to disappear and that it was the doctors or the cops who were involved. But that was talk, and no more evidence. But if the daughter of an authority figure has disappeared and the tracks led here, that's serious. Skull, couldn't it be a banal showdown? It's been speculated. But no, that's not it. Is that why I need your help? How long have you lived near this fine establishment in this town? Take a good look, Skull. By the way, Michael, but the guy who came in the other day with these fools, he works there as an orderly. How does he work? I think he's been there a while. But I asked him. That's what we decided. But in the evening, Benjamin didn't even have to ask the guy. 8 o'clock sharp. He was already sitting in his kitchen and drinking strong and sweet tea, which the owner had brewed and put in front of the guy. Come on, complain. Who has offended? What happened? Yes, you see, I only have a son-in-law here. You know, I finished the basic course in my medical school, and now I'm practicing. But guess what? I know our psychiatric clinic. I've complained before. And I warned you, it's gonna be tough out there. But what happened? And by the way, I have a couple questions for you about your psych ward. Later, though. Now, come on, tell me. So my grandmother and some other people said there was something going on there, but I didn't believe it. But my grandmother pointed out one thing to me. They dress. The young and beautiful in short dresses and stockings and braid their hair. And do you know why? Michael looked at his neighbor, and in his throat stood. He couldn't say it out loud, but he knew he needed help, at least in advice, at least in deed. The old thief sat and looked at the guy, realizing that he not only needed to speak out and ask for advice, but the conversation itself was going in the right direction for him. You see, Uncle Benjamin, they raped them there. Maybe they're even videotaping the whole thing. The guy just gasped at his own words and the realization that Kathy was there and what could be done to her. He took a breath and continued. That's why I came. I've heard about this clinic for a long time, but last night I decided to go and look around. But in short, Uncle Benjamin, I saw 2 cops going down to the basement, as well as our head doctor as an orderly. And they were taking a new girl down there. But apparently the cops had some kind of emergency, and they left quickly. But most importantly, I heard one of them telling our head doctor to leave the girl for later. The guy briefed me on the whole thing and looked at the reaction of the old tramp. On his face was read not only surprise, but also interest, especially a last news. Kathy was the name of the daughter of a street Petersburg authority who was considered missing or even killed, almost by order of the opposing gangs. And what does this girl look like? Tell me. I'm sorry, I'm asking you this for a reason. A friend of mine had a missing daughter. Her name was Kathy, and it all leads back to our town. Maybe it's her. The guy thought about it for a minute and started describing her in detail. But the most important feature the guy remembered was a scar on her left ankle. Then he listened and couldn't believe his ears. He knew the street Petersburg authority Alex and his daughter, and the very scar the girl had gotten, falling from a tree. His heart stabbed. Wow, that's how you find an authority figure's missing daughter. That's lucky. But maybe it's not her at all. Michael, why don't you show her to me? But we'll go tonight, when the patients are out on the street. Show it to me gently. But in terms of what's being done to them, we'll have to get into that basement, look in the nooks and crannies. Can you get the key? Michael shook his head negatively, but Benjamin just waved his hand. What can I expect from you? He went into the room and rummaged through the closet. A set of thieves' lockpicks was there. Basically, we can look inside this basement at night. Okay, Michael, when are you going to work? Tomorrow. Well, we'll go together early in the morning. You'll show me from afar the basement, and then if you're psychotic, sorry, patients are walking around. Point your finger at Kathy. They don't go out this early. They only let them out at lunchtime and in the evening. Okay, well, just show me the basement, and then at lunchtime, I'll come to that walk, and you can show me Kathy. But why? Uncle Benjamin, you think she's your friend's daughter. I knew for a fact she was no fool. From your description, it looks like it, but I'll have to see for myself. So Michael, it would help if you showed her to me. As for proof, I can pick any lock. Just dibs. It's our secret. I'll look, and then, if there's anything interesting, we'll figure out how to proceed. Michael was fine with that, and he calmed down a bit. But then I asked him the same question. What if there is nothing there that can be caught on? Michael, you're like a little child. I know exactly what to look at and what to look for. And then we'll set up a camera and film their antics. The old bastard chuckled, but when he looked at the boy's face, he stopped short. Yeah, I guess he wasn't laughing. Although, if you think about it, it's the height of cynicism to do such a thing as people in white coats and the police cover for them. Yeah, I got a special thing for the police. Plus, if this Kathy brothers thank me very much. Michael, I'm sorry. I guess years in places not so remote haven't made a saint out of me. But I do feel sorry for your charges, especially since some of them were just stabbed with antidepressants and sedatives, and now they're doing this. But that's okay. I'll take a look. We'll set up cameras if we have to. Then I'll report everything to the gang, and they will disperse your gang in no time. Michael listened and understood that the neighbor could do all this. But how to get the whole gang out? Uncle Benjamin. But understand the proof for your friends is good, but the case must be taken to court. Michael, do you take me for a fool? Imagine for a minute, if we're looking for my friend's daughter, he'll make such a scandal. He'll involve everyone he can. Lawyers and press, law enforcement, you name it. But most importantly, your head doctor and his cronies won't get away. That's what I need. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. For some reason, he believed this old jailer, although he realized that Benjamin was not without sin. All right, Benjamin, let me show you the loophole in the fence at the entrance tomorrow, and then the cellar itself. And you can come to this vine by 12 o'clock. That's when our patients take their lunchtime walks. I'll try to show you Kathy. Benjamin nodded and sipped from a cup of strong tea. He was satisfied with today. Helping Skull and freeing Kathy would be a big plus for him, and he'd been wanting to mess with the cops for a long time, if they were really nasty in that asylum. Michael got up and went home. It was almost 22 o'clock on the clock. It was necessary to wash and sleep. Tomorrow was a crucial and decisive day. In the morning, Benjamin, already 6:45, stood near the entrance and smoked. He put on a dark, unremarkable suit cap and dark glasses. He pulled up a cigarette and thought about the situation with Michael, Kathy, and this almshouse in general. Uncle Benjamin, hello. Michael greeted his neighbor and extended his hand to him. The man flashed him a cigarette and shook his hand. Quietly, Michael said, "Just call me Benjamin without uncle. I feel like an old man. I'm not young, but I'm not an old man at heart. All right. You ready to go?" He nodded, and the men walked slowly in the direction of the psychiatric clinic, talking among themselves. Like old friends, Michael walked and looked around so as not to catch the eye of the head doctor or one of the orderlies. There was no need to draw attention to himself. Approaching the fence of the psychiatric clinic, Michael looked around carefully and pointed with his hand to the entrance to the basement. This is the basement, and there's an opening further along the fence into the grounds. Just right for you. Just right. Now let's move on. They went further, passing the very gap in the fence, which was so advantageously disguised by the leaves of wild ivy and vines. Michael looked around again and pointed to the platform. In front of the main entrance, this is our so-called women's quarters, and it's where our patients walk from 12 until lunchtime. If anything, I can say from my observation, Kathy often likes to stand under that London tree, which is closer to the road. I've noticed her standing under the tree a couple of times, looking out at the roadway. Kathy nodded his head and lit a cigarette. He went on his way, throwing a few words to the guy. Good, then I'll see you tonight, or rather, tomorrow. Drop by my place in the evening to look at the collections. Michael looked at his neighbor and said nothing. He's weird. But on the other hand, he needs help now. And if the neighbor helps, it will be great. After all, even one life-saving achievement of medicine shift this day went quietly. No incidents, excesses, or patient antics. No nighttime police visits that might have suggested bad thoughts. Except that Kathy was restless this day. Michael watched her from the residence window, and at one point, noticed the girl becoming anxious. She began to wave her head intensely, and her ribbons in her hair fluttered in the wind. Then she turned abruptly and ran away from the fence. Directing his life toward Black Pond, the boy looked carefully at the roadway. Near the curb stood a dark blue, unremarkable car, old, but on the move strange. Who is it? Michael said it out loud. And then another orderly, Liam, turned around and looked out the window. What kind of car is that? We've got to get to the bottom of this. And he ran out of the office. And in a few seconds, his broad back, the guy saw near the fence. The orderly waved his hands, shouted something in the direction of the driver. But apparently, it had no effect. A few minutes later, though, when the chief physician started to approach the car suddenly sped off. That's an interesting situation. What's all the fuss about? It's just a car. You can't even see through the tinted windows. Who's in there? After a couple of minutes, Liam entered the office red as a boiled crawfish and started pacing the room back and forth. Michael at first said nothing, and then asked with the most indifferent tone possible, "And who was it in the car?" "Yes, you see, Michael, one psycho or psychos drive here under the fence and look at our patients. File a police report." The guy deliberately put such a provocative question, looking at the orderly and watching his reaction, but his face reflected nothing but anger and irritability. What's the use of these cops? They only throw up their hands. They say it's none of our business. No corpus delicti and all that. And we have to run around chasing these assholes away. Yeah, there's plenty of crazy people out there. By the way, have you noticed how new this is? Kathy's patient react to that car. No, I didn't see her shaking, and she stood there shaking her head, and then she ran toward Black Pond. Oh, shit. Why didn't you say something? And the orderly rushed out into the street. I wonder why he reacted like that. Michael became curious, and he went to the window. The orderly was standing next to the head doctor, telling him something. Then he pointed toward the pond, and they both went there at a brisk pace. This is interesting, thought the trainee, and quickly ran to the first floor. He went to the artificial pond, which enjoyed a bad reputation already on the shore of the notorious Black Pond. The guy caught a picture on the shore, sat Kathy, and swayed, and near her stood an orderly and the chief physician, and nervously smoked. Guy did not understand what was going on, so he approached the trio and nodding at the girl, asked Noah, "What happened?" "Yeah, you know, Michael. The first day Kathy almost went swimming in the lake, and when Liam said she ran here, I thought she had a craving for water again. So she'd have wet her feet in waist-deep water. How can I put it, Michael? Our patients are such that they can drown themselves in a spoonful of water, and her reaction to the car Liam told me about also surprised me. She never showed any emotion before. Maybe the hypnosis has stopped working, and she is coming to her senses and grieving. You've probably been skipping classes on the subject of hypnosis, and it's the kind of thing that doesn't weaken over time. It's not sleeping pills or tranquilizers, is it? I guess, Noah, I guess. Both Michael and the doctor in charge stood by the lake for a few minutes, watching as the orderly took Kathy to the women's ward. I wonder what's going to happen to her and why she reacted the way she did to the car parked near the fence. Is there something to that? I'll have to tell my neighbor about it. Maybe he knows something, but the neighbor was the one in that car. Benjamin kicked his old broad out of the garage and thought it would be more convenient to watch the loony bin on wheels. It was at 1:30 that he drove the car up to the place where the loonies were strolling, and oh joy, near this fence stood Kathy. It was the daughter of the St. Petersburg authority figure. There was no doubt about it. Yes, he had seen her about 15 years ago. She had grown up and become a beautiful girl, but her eyes were still the same, just like when he'd seen her at her birthday party when she was 7. I wonder if the scar is still there. I should ask Michael to look at the scar on her leg. That's the only way to tell. I parked Benjamin's car with the window down and looked at the girl carefully. They must have drugged the poor girl with some pills. She's as good as dead. Eyes blank, all dressed up in some stupid costume. Yeah, I guess the guy's right about it all looking like something. The man rolled down the passenger side window more and called out to the girl, "Kathy, listen to me. "Don't be afraid. I'm Uncle Benjamin. Do you remember me?" The girl stood there for a minute, paying no attention to the car and the driver. Then she turned her head and looked at him. At that moment, Benjamin waved his hand and smiled. But a meaningful thought suddenly flashed on the girl's face, and she began to shake her head, and then screamed and rushed running towards the park. Shit. Benjamin didn't expect such a reaction, and so quickly, closing the window, rushed out of the place in the direction of the city. "I don't want to be seen here, otherwise they'll dump the office." Benjamin drove around the city for half an hour, and coming back, he could not resist and drove slowly along the fence of the psychiatric clinic. But there was no one in the yard. It must be lunchtime, the man said to himself, and decided to have a snack. He turned the steering wheel and headed for the nearest cafe to drink strong flavored coffee and eat a sweet mug. He had long favored this cafe with its own pastry shop. It served the strongest coffee and delicious pastries, just like when he was a kid. "Yes," the man thought, "when my grandson comes to visit me, I'll definitely bring him here with his father to drink coffee and eat more delicious food." But emotions came over Benjamin at the mention of his grandson, and a traitorous terror returned to his eye. "You're not well." The waitress came up to the man and handed him a menu. No, the girl just remembered his grandson, who lives abroad with his father, and thought that it would be nice to bring him here. "It's just a bit of a rush, so to speak. I understand. Coffee and a mug for you as always. Although, I'd advise you that our pastry chef has never tasted better. Let's have your labor. We should try it. Because girlfriends. The man drank coffee and smiled at the rays of sunshine that penetrated the cafe, fell on his table and hands. It was so good to just sit there and think about nothing and enjoy every minute. But he had to go home and think about how to plan his evening, or rather, his night out at the clinic. Benjamin paid for his coffee and, leaving the waitress a generous tip, drove home. Already at home, he slept, touched up, under the shower, and after making himself a strong tea, sat down in the kitchen. Coffee is good, but strong and sweet tea helped him to think. Probably habits from places not so distant were making themselves known, but he had long ago stopped paying attention to the fact that he was sitting down and what people would think of it. And now he was helping a friend whose daughter had disappeared under very strange circumstances. A traitorous terror came to Benjamin's eye again. He remembered his daughter, beautiful and clever, who had gone to the Emirates and found her happiness there. How she was happy about her new job, and her husband, who, to his credit, loved her very much. Pregnancy and rejoiced. But so Benjamin Nikita do not need to wipe the snot and pull Kathy. And the man began to pack a backpack, a flashlight, and an old lockpick set for a night out. Machine oil, so the lock wouldn't stick, if anything. Now, having lost one daughter, he wanted to help his friend Kathy's daughter get out of the asylum. The man had long thought about why she had been kidnapped a year ago from her father's home, and many people had written it all off as a thievery. But that's not the case here. Alex is a competent and clever man. He's handled the most heated disputes, so sworn enemies parted as friends and best partners. And here, who would take revenge? No, the man shook his head. It's something else, he thought to himself, not what others think. Why did he think that? He didn't know. But if the girl he'd seen today was Kathy and was his friend's daughter, Benjamin realized what the reason might be. The girl had an unearthly beauty, her figure, long blonde hair, blue eyes, and she had the same mind as her father. And if he was right, then she was probably kidnapped by visiting tourists who were in the business of kidnapping and shooting racy movies. Maybe that's what happened. But the man was simply afraid to think what Kathy might have done. After all, even among the right criminal authorities, violence is a forbidden topic. A woman must be loved. She must be persuaded. You have to placate her with gifts and kisses, But you can't rape her. All the more to shoot nasty things against her will. It's one thing for a woman to do it for money. It's another to rape her. Well, it's gonna be all right now. Be patient, Kathy. Throwing his backpack over his shoulders, Benjamin went out into the street and headed towards the psychiatric clinic. It was already dark, and there were no stars in the sky. What pleased the old thief? He quietly approached the fence and skulked away, but with a ducking motion. He stopped imperiously under a tree and looked around. There was no one. There was silence. It was ringing dark. Only, in the windows of the first-floor patients' rooms, there was a dim light burning. That's good. That means I won't need a flashlight. This light will suffice. And the man rushed to the cellar, quickly oiled the lock, and opened it professionally. Benjamin did not hang it in place, leaving the door covered, but not tightly, so that in case of need he could quickly run out. The hinges should be oiled as well. It wouldn't be good if the door suddenly peeked open quickly, coping with the hinges. The man began to listen to the sounds in the basement and slowly walked forward. The hallway was quiet. On the left side were storerooms, some closed, others without doors. That's fine, the old thief thought. There will be a place to hide in case of trouble. Strange, where these subhumans had found a porn studio. But at the very end, Benjamin saw a massive door, so stuffed with felt. Yeah, there you are, and soundproofed at the very end so. No one could hear the girls screaming, the bastards. He went to the door and listened. But what kind of work had been done there? But what kind of barrier was there? There was no door that could not be opened by an old thief who had gone through a fine school. Indeed, the locks were also hidden under a layer of felt. Good point. No sound will get through the gaps. Well, that's clever, but I'll get you open. The man lifted the layer of felt carefully and listened. Quiet, which means no one. That's good, which means we can work. And Benjamin carefully began to pick the lock. Yes, it's a fancy lock, but for a craftsman like me, it shouldn't be too hard to pick. And after a couple minutes, the man opened the door to the secret studio. Wow, that's quite a spread. The furnishings, state-of-the-art, technology, and newfangled digital equipment, all put to great use. No wonder with the police running it all. And apparently, they're making a lot of money. Yeah, I guess crazy movies are popular with crazy people. But that man heard how heavy doors, covered with his lacquer, began to open, and without thinking, Benjamin jumped under the bed. That's quite a situation. At least the bed was wide, and it was covered with a long sheet all the way to the floor. Shit, thought the thief. What a fool not to listen to what was going on outside the door. So I got him. The main thing is not to suspect anything and not to search the place. But apparently the unexpected guests didn't suspect a thing. Oh, look, Noah's already opened the door. Didn't have to fiddle with the lock. Yeah, Stas. It's a nice studio. There's plenty of room for fun. And the man sat down on the bed and took pictures, and he laughed. Apparently, it was the cops Michael was talking about, who had been let in by the head doctor. So Benjamin quietly exhaled and listened further. Yes, boss. What are we going to do here? Are we going to film racy scenes? No, just participate. We got some local girls from the head doctor. So we'll try new things, boss will. It's not very exciting, but it's mental. I don't know what's on her mind. Would she bite or stab at the peak of pleasure? No. Yeah, well, it's a valid concern, Benjamin thought. But if you had a knife, you'd be so heavy. You'd be falling out of bed. You must be 150 pounds. And all that on a young girl. Ugh, that's disgusting. But what to do? So far, luck was not on his side. But then another man came into the room and said, "Sorry, Mr. Mikhailovich, I can't make it today. Apparently, it's either the moon or the stars. But our girls are on a rampage. Aha. Apparently, The head doctor tearfully apologizes for his wards. But apparently, the police, Brass didn't like the news. And he's not happy. Noah, why is that? Or does the hospital no longer have the appropriate injections? We've injected a couple of times, and the girl sleeps well. Yeah, we've already injected them, but it's still wrong. I'm sorry. Come back in a couple days and I'll put them on hard shots. Then they'll be as smooth as silk. All right. The cop said grudgingly and got out of bed, walked towards the exit. But next time, there should be 2 or even 3 girls. The doctor answered nothing, but only closed the door behind his guests, locking it shut. After a few minutes, the thief crawled out from under the bed and began to look around. He decided not to rush out of the room, but to put his video camera here. He definitely needed proof of what was going on here. Kathy then. He can quietly get out of the room, but this office needs to be covered up, and he knows to whom he will send the received materials. To his daughter Alex. Unsure he'd tear anyone's throat out. Quietly, looking around, only stopped her gaze on the partners who were closing the improvised window. So over there at the very top you can install a camera. Yeah, it was a good thing he had his introductions. And not too long ago, he'd been fitted with a mini camera that ran on batteries and turned on the recording at any movement. So, sweetie, put it up and film it here. And the other day I'll come and check what you've prepared for me and make sure the camera is in working order. Benjamin copied carefully his video, point, and check everything behind him and quietly left the room. He locked the door and quietly walked out of the basement. There was no one near the entrance, but still God protects him, said the nun. The thief said quietly and began to walk along the walls to the cherished fence. Going out into the street, he took and walked along the road, pretending to stroll in the picturesque cat, taking in his hands a pre-prepared bottle of beer. And even if he was stopped by the police, they would not be able to attribute anything but an administrative offense to him. Although it's not like breaking into a mental institution, but I'll get over it. And with a quiet step, he went in the direction of his house, got to the house. Benjamin quickly for about 10 minutes and already in his apartment, having thrown off his clothes and stood under the shower, he exhaled with relief. Yes, I have not seen such a case since the dashing 90s. But the good thing is now there will be evidence and grounds to visit you, gentlemen in white coats on legal grounds, and smash your balaganza with all the proletarian hatred. We've had a night's experience, and the smell of a psychiatric clinic. Old Kogan went to the kitchen and made himself some tea. He had to think calmly about what he had seen and how to present it to his street Petersburg friend. The fact that they were making strawberries there, the man realized. And in principle, the camera will definitely record all the abominations. It's a matter of technique and time. But what about the girl who looked a lot like Kathy? You'll have to leave that to Michael. He works there, albeit as an orderly, but it would be easier for him to examine her under any pretext. Now, we just have to wait for the morning and for what Michael and I will bring. Benjamin turned off the light and left the cup on the table and went to bed. After all, the coming day also promised a lot of things to do and new information. It was necessary to have a fresh head to think everything over and make the right decision. Already, closer to 10 o'clock to the old thief at the door rang. Probably Michael, and he was not mistaken. Uncle Benjamin, I came straight from work to see you. May I come in? I've been waiting for you. I just got up and made breakfast. Give me my hands and sit down at the table. I don't feel like eating right now. Uncle Benjamin, do you have a lump in your throat? Our lunatics almost went crazy today. I don't know what happened, but they all went crazy. Some howled, others sang songs, and the women's ward all threw off their clothes. It was a restless night, I know. Michael looked at his neighbor perplexed, but did not ask anything. He sat down at the table and looked at the plate of scrambled eggs, Benjamin had placed in front of him. I stopped by her lovely basement today and got into the spicy studio. And by the way, while I was there were visitors, most likely. Your Noah, the head doctor, and the police. But don't worry, nothing happened. First came the cops, then came your doctor and said that the patients are raging. So everything was quickly turned off. But it's not worth the wait. He promised them strawberries in a couple days. But I left the video camera there for now. I'll pick it up in a couple days. We'll see what's on it. And then we'll figure out where to go and who to show it to. By the way, did you check to see if this new Kathy patient of yours has a cross-shaped scar? Yeah, the night before everyone else, I was working on her, and I got a good look at it. It's a small one just below the kneecap. Benjamin nodded and smiled. So it really is Kathy. She had been found. There was no doubt now. That was good. I'd have to get proof of the luxury, the doctors, and the police. Then we could celebrate. Victory. It's her, said Benjamin, eating scrambled eggs. There's no doubt now, but we have to wait a while. Let the camera capture everything, and then trust me, I know who to show the material to, and it won't go away. Uncle Benjamin, I realize you're a lawman, but it's one thing to have a criminal altercation and another. This needs to go to court. That's right, sweet man. What did you think? Gangbangers in black cars are gonna come in and shoot everybody, and that's it? No, we're just gonna show them all up. And then there's the lawyers, the courts, and of course, the media. Don't worry about that. Just keep your ear to the ground at your job and try to make sure that nothing happens to Kathy during these days. By the way, who's giving her the sedation shots? Yeah, there's this Liam. Orderly, big guy with huge fists. Why? Try to make sure you get the job. You make sure you don't give the girl the shots. She has to come off the drugs and be, so to speak, sober and clear-headed when it all comes to a head. But even if things don't work out, just keep an eye on her. Michael nodded his head and smiled, acknowledging the breakfast. He himself hadn't noticed how hungry he'd gotten in 24 hours and practically gobbled up everything he prepared in one fell swoop. Yes, he had a good appetite. The landlord looked at the young orderly and smiled. The man brewed tea and took out his favorite girlfriends. Let's drink tea. And listen to me carefully for now. Michael nodded his head, began to listen to the old thief. He told him that Kathy, supposedly the daughter of one of the street Petersburg authorities, it was time to close this studio, and his help would be very helpful. And she wasn't mentally ill, more like a kidnapping victim. Half an hour later, the guy was on his way home. Uncle Benjamin's gonna go, or my mother and grandmother will be worried. And you call me if you need anything. And where will you find out? Okay, while we wait. If there's anything new, I'll drop by Grandma's. Thanks for the goodies. She's always spoiling the old man. What are you, an old man? You'll give the young ones a head start, won't you? And shaking hands, the neighbors parted. Michael opened the door and from the doorstep heard the smell of his grandmother's famous PR. She at his place always cooked her signature delicious and grandmother's pie. Smells like from the doorstep. Why'd you stay late at work? Oh no, I stopped by my neighbor Benjamin's. But they're to talk and I was going to talk to the old fella about something. Mom, don't coach. No one's safe from jail or prison. We all could be, just like in my Elm's house, by the way. And the guy threw his backpack on the hall table and went to the bathroom to wash his hands. When he came out, he went into the kitchen, where breakfast was already on the table. Mom, I don't want any. I ate at work, but tea and cake would be great. Michael didn't tell her that he'd had breakfast at the old thug's. He didn't want to make his mother nervous. The woman looked at him carefully, but didn't say anything. Only the grandmother, apparently, guessed where her grandson had eaten. but shook her head, said nothing. Granson, but I just put the pie on. We'll be ready only in half an hour. In the meantime, bear with me. All right, I'll help Siberia in the meantime. One boy nodded his head and gave his grandmother a peck on the cheek and went back to his room. Michael spent these days at home, waiting for information from Benjamin, but he was silent. They crossed paths in the yard a couple of times, but the neighbor only said hello and didn't say anything. And the guy didn't really insist. He understood that if he didn't say anything, it was the right thing to do. But on Sunday, Benjamin decided to check the familiar basement and take the camera. He didn't tell his neighbor about his plans. He decided to take the tape first, see what he had, and then act according to the situation. Late at night, Benjamin, as he did the first time, went to the cellar door and looked around. Everything was quiet, but the silence was deceptive. Come on, he had to go get the camera anyway, and he slipped downstairs, opened the greased door, and froze on the threshold. The man listened carefully to the sounds, but the silence was sepulchral. With quiet shuffling steps, Benjamin approached the very last door, orbited it, and varnished it and lifted it. At the keyhole, he listened carefully. Quiet. So the studio is not working for its intended purpose today. That's fine, no one will interfere. Quickly removing the camera, Benjamin headed for the exit, and just as quickly went out and closed the door as he came in. But as he passed the women's quarters, the man didn't hold back. He walked over to one of the dimly lit windows and peered through it at a bed and a dark-haired woman sitting on it. A woman dressed in a short dress with ribbons in her hair. Yes, thought the man. Another victim. How did I get the camera in time? He mentally pitied her because he knew what would happen next. But on the other hand, what could he do now? Nothing. Once outside, Benjamin walked home as before, pondering what he would see on the tape at home. He inserted the flash drive into the TV. The man began to watch the video, and what he saw there only confirmed his suspicions. And the worst and most disgusting, he angrily turned off the TV after a few minutes of watching, threw the remote on the couch, and went out onto the balcony. Yeah, that was to be expected. Okay, now we can show Alex all of this, and then let him think how to deal with these creatures and tell Kathy about it. Benjamin smoked a long time to calm down, and understandably so. Seeing all that filth, although he is a thief and experienced, has seen a lot in his life, but such a man has always respected women. But how do they even do it? They're sick women. It's unthinkable, and he couldn't find an answer. What's there to say? Mental illness must have its own degree of variance, or maybe it's congenital. Who knows? Benjamin threw the cigarette butt down and went to bed. What was it, though? Even after a couple of minutes of watching, he was shivering. But apparently, fatigue and emotion took over, and the man fell into a deep but restless sleep. Already, in the morning, Benjamin was on duty on the balcony to look for Michael, who had to return from work. And when he appeared at the entrance, he called him and gestured for him to come up to him. Uncle Benjamin, anything new? Yes. Not on our honor. Remember I told you I put a camera in the basement? Benjamin nodded and beckoned him into the hall, turned on the video, and let him watch. It was filmed by Michael. The orderly was horrified to see the head doctor and his cronies having fun with sick women at night. He certainly did not expect such a thing. The boy closed his eyes and quietly said, "Turn it all off." Benjamin did not argue. It was really disgusting. He sat there and didn't know how to go on living with it. Opening his eyes, he looked at the landlord and asked if he had anything to drink. He nodded his head and took out a bottle of vodka from the bar. He hadn't been drinking for a long time, but he always had alcohol just in case, and now he put a glass of white vodka on his neighbor's face. He held it out and said, "Wait, I'll bring snacks." But Michael did not wait for an appetizer, but drank the vodka in one fell swoop and sniffed it with his sleeve. At that minute, the host entered the room with a slice of sausage and cheese, but the guy nodded his head negatively and said, "I can have some more vodka, but at least you're behind the ring." Benjamin poured, sat down next to him. Michael drank this glass in one breath, and now he took a snack and looked at the old thief attentively, talking about what we'll do, what we won't do, and what you'll do. "I already thought to show to whom it is necessary to give a report to their own, and I will wait what they will tell me. But I think it won't take long to get a reaction. I also asked you here on purpose. I want to warn you that there may be some serious inspections at your clinic in the near future. I'm aware of that. I hope everything's legal and these assholes don't get away with it. Don't worry, they won't. You tell me, how's Kathy? How can I tell you? I got the head doctor to let me give her shots, just for show. But I didn't. But then, you see, Uncle Benjamin, she came into the clinic sort of hypnotized. So, she probably doesn't realize where she is. Or maybe it's like, she's in there. And is she really mentally damaged? I hope not. Although we can't rule out that possibility. But now, the main thing is to get her out of there. And then other specialists will deal with her." And Michael nodded his head. He was sober as a glass even after 2 glasses of alcohol. Apparently, the nervous shock did not let the alcohol to work. The guy sat on his neighbor's couch for a while longer, silently leaned back, then looked at the man and said, "I'm going home. I need to be good. Just Michael, I'm begging you, don't do anything on your own right now. Do you realize how dangerous this is? That's one thing. And secondly, you can't do anything on your own. You'll only make things worse for yourself and Kathy and the other patients." The boy nodded his head. He realized he was right. And it was stupid and dangerous to take any action now. All he could do was wait. But he didn't wait long. The very next day, he was summoned to work. "Michael, good morning. Is no bothering you? You've been summoned to work immediately." The head doctor's voice was frightened and trembling. "Good morning. What's wrong?" the guy asked. It was just for show. Did he realize what might be going on in his clinic? Nothing yet. Come on over." And the head doctor hung up. "Yeah, that's how you guys got moving." Apparently, the neighbor got the materials to the right place. And now the guy quickly got dressed and started to leave the apartment when he was stopped on the doorstep by his grandmother. "Michael, what are you doing up so early?" the chief of medicine called. "I have to go to work for my shift." "So you didn't even bring any food?" "No, I didn't have a shift. There's something going on, and it's probably an emergency." "Okay." Then he slammed the door, and 5 minutes later he was at work. And what he saw made the guy very happy. A whole brigade of enforcers were crowding around the main entrance. Orderlies and doctors nervously stood and smoked in the distance, and patients were carefully taken out and put into ambulances. Michael approached the orderly Liam and asked Liam, "What is going on?" "Don't you see, OMON, we're raiding and cleaning up, and that someone is selling drugs. Go higher. Someone organized a porn studio in our basement, and they blamed it on our head doctor and a few of his henchmen. That's what it's all about." Michael made a surprised face, but at that very moment he saw Kathy being taken out of the women's building by 2 men and carefully put into a black Jeep. So she really was the daughter of a reputable thief. But thank God she wasn't mentally ill. He looked at her and was startled by the hand on his shoulder. "It was you, Michael." The voice was commanding and quiet at the same time. He turned around and saw a man dressed in an expensive suit. He immediately realized that he was either one of the highest representatives of the government or a criminal authority. Michael nodded his head and only wanted to ask, "Who are you?" But the man was ahead of him. "I'm Alexander, Kathy's father. Benjamin, your neighbor, told me everything about you, about your help. So thank you for bringing my daughter back. You're welcome. I know it doesn't have to be this way. It's mean and wrong. Kathy's gonna be okay." The man nodded his head and looked at the boy carefully. But he didn't say anything. And what could he say if he didn't know anything about his child's condition? But God willing, everything would be fine. He just nodded his head once more, thanked him quietly, and turned around and walked to his car, which immediately sped away. As soon as he closed the door, Michael stared after him for a few minutes, reflecting on the situation, and at that moment the chief doctor and his associates were being loaded into the truck. It was all over. Michael did not notice how his neighbor Benjamin quietly approached him and clapped him on the shoulder. Now all the members of the Corps de Ballet have been captured and sent to places not so remote. Believe me, my contacts will make sure of that. And Kathy, it was her dad, but in a black BMW. Yeah, I think she'll be fine. And you, neighbor, thanks for pulling her and the other women out of that bondage. Michael raised an eyebrow, perplexed, not really understanding what the neighbor was saying, but he immediately clarified. You see, Kathy isn't the only healthy woman in this almshouse. Many beauties were just grabbed on the street and brought here under the guise of one or another mental disorder. And what was done to them next? You know what I mean. Now the shop's been shut down. And a special big thank you from my friends. The neighbor patted him on the shoulder and went home. And Michael stood on the street and smoked for a long time, realizing that there could be a great number of such clinics all over the country. After all, there will always be people like his chief physician, the chief of police, prone to such entertainments. But now, Michael realized that there was one less clinic of debauchery, and it was his direct merit. He walked home and thought about how a person's fate can turn out. Even take Noah, the head doctor, a respected man and an excellent specialist. But something drove him to such a crime. Kathy is the daughter of a wealthy father, albeit with a criminal record, intelligent and beautiful. She had suffered at the hands of non-humans who could simply stab her with drugs to the point of being a vegetable. But that's all in the past now, and his town can breathe easy. Oh, Michael, you got home from work so fast, lady. How's grandma's pie cooking? The grandmother looked at her grandson and realized everything on his face. She smiled and put her specialty pie on the table, pouring her grandson some tea-flavored tea. The woman knew that now everything would be fine in this town, and certainly no one else would get hurt. And all of this was due to her grandson. She was proud of him, as any grandmother would be. After all, it is probably right to say that one loves one's grandchildren more than one loves one's own children. Betty smiled, and after patting him on the head, sat down on a chair and carefully watched her specialty pie with doctors like him flying in both cheeks. One could be calm for every patient, for everyone.